What's going on, everyone? Welcome. Episode 88 of Poppitt's Corner. And this is the bucket list interview for me, ladies and gentlemen. I got the legendary Mr. Frank Marino of Mahogany Rush on the line. Frank, how you doing? Thanks so much for coming on the show and giving me a couple minutes of your time.
No problem. I'm glad to be here. My pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, Frank, before we get started, how have you been doing this whole quarantine thing?
Well, for me, it doesn't affect me at all because I spent the better part of the last 10 years basically in kind of isolation doing this project for the DVD that came out. So it became, I had to fix that DVD. It was very, very damaged, and it's called Live at the Agora. And it took so long to do it that I just got used to not doing anything. I didn't tour, I didn't do anything. All I did was fix that thing for almost 10 years. So to all of a sudden people complaining about being locked in their places, for me it's just another day, like Groundhog Day. I'm okay, I'm good.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely get to the DVD towards, the end of the interview. But for those of you who have not checked it out, I definitely recommend it. It's phenomenal. We'll get to some fun facts about it hopefully later on, and whatnot. But just how I like to get started in these interviews is just ask you, your first recollection of just hearing music for the first time, and kind of what was the band for you.
Well, obviously, my mother is Syrian, Christian Syrian, so when we were very small, she would play Arabic music on the record player. And my father is Italian, so he would play Tony Bennett and that kind of stuff on the record player. So that's my earliest recollection of music, going right back to a child. But when music became, let's say, part of our lives, because we were children of the 60s, basically, it was really the Beatles. Okay, so, when the Beatles made their debut on Ed Sullivan, in the earliest 60s, that was like, oh my goodness, what is this, right? And like every other kid, and let's grow our bangs and get Beatle boots and be the Beatles. So that was my earliest recollection of music. And then of course the 60s quickly morphed into the Summer of Love '67, a few years after the Beatles, and by that time music was everybody's thing. It wasn't just something that it was all you could do. Today the options are so much more. There was no such thing as a video game back then. There was no such thing as many channels on TV back then. And so you spent most of your time not in the house like kids do today, and you basically tried to go where somebody had records, and you'd listen to Beatle records, or you'd go to the local skating arena where they would play, 45s, while the kids skated around. I didn't do much of that, but we would be there hanging out, and, you'd hear music all the time. So music was, or popular music was the background of everybody's life, and it wasn't unusual to talk to your friends in those days and simply talk in quotes from songs that you heard, like you'd say a line of this song or a line of that song somebody was saying, I can't get no satisfaction, and everyone would laugh, So music was the thing, but I was also personally very much into the jazz kind of, the swing kind of music that my father had and his friends had, listened to and grown up with themselves. So I wanted to be a drummer, and Buddy Rich was just, the thing for me. And so I very, very early on played drums. And that was the style that I personally gravitated towards, even though later on rock came along. One of the things that really drew me to Jimi Hendrix, which I ended up liking very much, was not really Jimi Hendrix. It was the fact that his drummer, Mitch Mitchell, played very much like Buddy Rich, and no other rock drummers did. So I was drawn to that for that reason early on, being that I was into the swing jazz kind of drumming. And that was those were the origins of it. And when I finally did end up as a guitar player, I started at basically at 14.
Right. Well, which we'll get into.
Playing guitar.
Yeah, which we'll get into that.
Yeah. But just to say, like to make the linkage there, when it finally turned into guitar for various reasons I can explain later. Drums sort of fell by the wayside for quite a few years until I revisited them later in my life, and now I'm actually, when I have free time in a day, rather than play guitar, I'm literally playing my drums or playing jazz.
Totally. Well, let's go back, just to the Beatles, and I just kind of want to ask you, what about the Beatles did it for you when you saw them on Ed Sullivan?
Well, look, it was, what does it for any kid at the time? It was something new, right? So there had been a lot of music. I mean, people had, there had been bands obviously before the Beatles. AM radio was always playing something. There was the latest top 10 hit coming at you, blah, blah, blah. You'd hear that, all the time. But the Beatles, you kind of got swept up in it because not only was it this new thing and they looked new and the sound was new, but it was so different, and you'd see all the other people who were into it. I guess it was kind of like almost like an infection or something. It happened to everybody. It wasn't just me. It was just everybody liked the Beatles. And I think the first thing that drew you to them wasn't even the music. It was the look. It was the hair. It was the clothing, the Beatle boots, the Beatle jackets, the Beatle caps. The marketing that Brian Epstein successfully did with the Beatles was probably the greatest marketing ever, even if you include Coca-Cola or McDonald's. I mean, this was the greatest marketing ever done, and it worked. It worked for them and made a bunch of 18-year-olds super millionaires before they were 20. In those days, money. So I guess it really worked really well. And then later it became the music. It was like, hey, this music is really good. Everyone liked the music. It's hard to not like some of the Beatle tunes because they sort of vary, and there's these different eras, where they're the pop boys, and then they become the hippie band, and then they end up with Abbey Road and Sgt. Pepper. So there was something for everybody there. And, as the 60s wore on and kids started to use marijuana and drugs and LSD, all of a sudden the Beatles were doing that kind of music. So they were always the background of everybody's life.
Totally.
For a while.
And there's kind of a parallel between the Beatles and even your career, just from the fact of, the Beatles were only around for 10 years, and their catalog is hugely different, from the first year to the last or whatever. And with your career, especially in the first, 7-8 years, I mean, from Maxim to, we'll say, Tales of the Unexpected, or, they're vastly different records. And I think...
Yes, they are, yeah. And that's on purpose, by the way. That's not an accident.
Right.
That happened because, look, I never really wanted a career. I ended up on a record label, something I didn't want to be doing in the beginning. So the whole thing there, I was really reluctant to go that route. But once I had done it, every time a record would be finished, and then it was like, time for a new record, Frank. And I was like, why? I don't feel like it, And then they'd say, no, you have to do a new record. And so my biggest fear was, oh no, I've got to do a new record, and quite honestly, I don't want it to sound like the last record. So it was on purpose to try to find a new way of expressing what I had originally expressed, but in a more clear format, and plus I was drawing on my own life experiences, which for a very long time were very important. And so that was the thing. But I can tell you something about those records that you've mentioned just now. There isn't a single song, maybe there's 2 songs in my entire career that were being done before the day they were recorded. So every single album that I walked in to do, at Maxim there was a couple of tunes we had done before we had recorded. But starting at Child of the Novelty, and onwards, there really wasn't a single day that I went to the studio to record a song for the new album where the song was already written. They were just not, Strange Universe had been written, but it was different. But every other tune was like, okay, you're in the studio, you need a song for your album, and I'd write it right then, that day while the tape was rolling. And then I'd teach it to the band. And then we'd record it as an instrumental, and then at the end I would think up what lyrics should go with it. And then that song would be finished. That's how they were all done, every single one of them.
That's crazy. Just from a songwriter standpoint, I mean, that's super unorthodox. As a fellow songwriter myself.
Yeah, Tanner, but it really proves the old adage that necessity is the mother of invention. And so, most musicians are procrastinators. They want to put off till next week or tomorrow. We're basically lazy people. That's why we have musician jobs. And, we don't have guys telling us to punch a clock. I've never had a job other than being a musician in my band. So we're mostly like that. We'll say, well, we got to do this. We'll do it tomorrow, or we'll finish it later. In the meantime, we want to watch a hockey game or something, That's basically how we all are. And so my life was that, and so but then all of a sudden you're signed, you've been signed up with a record label which you don't even know anything about, and they're telling you now it's time to do the next thing. So it becomes such a necessity that all of a sudden you're put in front of microphones. It's like, oh my God, I haven't thought about even doing a single thing here, and so I better write something. And so I'd write one, and then two, and then three, and then four, and then before you knew it, the records were done. But that was the fear, is that you'd get to that next record, which came only 9 months later, or a year later, and they're demanding another record. And the only thing that I played in between the records, like with the band and at people's houses and stuff, was stuff that wouldn't have made it onto the record, because it was all these long jams and solos and stuff like that. Nobody wanted that on the records. First of all, you couldn't get more than 20 minutes aside on a record, and one of my songs is 25 minutes. So so then you'd get to the studio after a year of jamming around and doing that at your live gigs, and then you'd say, okay, time for another record. And it was like, oh my gosh. So you'd draw on what you had been doing, jamming, and you'd write tunes out of that. You'd find a way to write a tune out of something you'd been doing, but it wasn't actually a song. And then the band would say, what are we doing? I'd say, well, just, give me an hour or something. I'll put something together. And they'd, go in the other room and, watch TV or something. And, well, most of the time they were picking up girls, but they'd be doing that. And then I'd say, okay, guys, I got one, here's how it goes. And I'd show them Dragonfly or whatever, or the makings of it, and I'd ask Paul, on the bass to play this. And I'd ask, because I played drums, I was very, very much hands-on about what type of thing I'd like the drummer to give me. And that's how the songs were crafted. It was on the fly. And my fear was always, does this sound like something we did before? Because I didn't want that. It was like the worst thing was, how do I fill up the whole record without ending up sounding like I did on another record? And gradually, we did manage to do that and not sound like we did before.
Yeah, and like I said, that's why I just find a huge parallel between you and the Beatles on that specific aspect. Now, you talked a little bit about, Maxim, and I kind of wanted to start, even just before that, on kind of how you met Jimmy and Paul. Were they high school friends of yours, and you just decided to start a band?
No, not
okay.
at all. No, actually, the fact is that I was calling my music Mahogany Rush before there was the idea to have a band. Okay, that was... Mahogany Rush wasn't the name of my band. It became the name of my band. But I had used the expression Mahogany Rush many times when people would ask me, what's this kind of weird sound effects music you're doing? Because that's what I was doing when I was just a guitar player playing with noises. I have a past in which I started playing music in a hospital due to an overdose of LSD. So my mind was pretty blown, and I was trying to use music as a way of keeping my mind on anything but the bad trip. And everything about my life for the next 7 to 10 years was about trying to express and describe what I was going through. And so the terms Mahogany Rush were terms I used when I would speak to the doctors. And they'd say, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm having a mahogany rush. It sounds crazy now, but to a guy on acid, it sounds perfectly normal. And so that was what I called it, Mahogany Rush music. So the first earliest iterations of what would then become a band were simply me meeting guys that I had known and going to their house and playing with them in their basements, because that's what people did back then. You went to your friend's house and you played with instruments or amplifiers or drum sets because you didn't have PlayStations to go play with. Like that was the thing kids did. And they'd bring their drum over to someone's house because the other guy had a guitar at his house. And those earliest forms became bands because you ended up doing it every day with the same guys. But it wasn't bands in the sense that we're gonna create a band and get gigs and be a band like the Beatles, like with a name and all that stuff. It was just guys doing it. So I would call it Mahogany Rush, the earliest iterations. When it started to actually become a band, now different guys were always playing with me. They'd say, let's go play with that crazy Marino kid who's living in the outer space, and we'll do his Mahogany Rush music as a style. So Jimmy came along after I had already had a few drummers. And Paul didn't come along till we had almost 7 guys playing with me and Jimmy, or at least 5. So it ended up as Jimmy and Paul after many iterations of what was the Mahogany Rush band. But it wasn't, I met Jimmy at one of those things where I was playing with other guys. and he, sat down as being one of the guys who would jam. And I liked him. It had nothing to do with his playing. It had to do with his personality. I liked, when you like a guy, I really liked the guy. So I'd rather, screw around with him than with the other guys because we had a lot in common. And Paul was a guy who actually lived in my town, but he used to come to the rooms and to the gigs that me and Jimmy were playing with Jack. I used to have a bass player called Jack Rook. And Paul was one of the guys who would always be there, like trying to help out the band and stuff. And one day we were playing a very large outside gig, and the bass player ran away with the girl somewhere, and we couldn't find him, and we had to go on stage. So Paul said, well, can I play? We went, yeah, go ahead, just play. Like, we weren't trying to create a band. So then it became me and Jimmy and Paul at that point. And it just so happened that right around that time, business kind of people that came running around say, hey, let us manage you. Hey, let us be your crew. Let us be your road manager. And you gave those jobs to them simply because they were your friends. So if we had a friend named Paul Vec who wasn't a musician of any kind, but he liked to run around and try to get gigs at high schools for people. So it's okay, you be the manager. And then another guy, you be the roadie. It was like when you put a street hockey team together and you say, I'm Gordie Howe, and the other guy says, I'm Wayne Gretzky, That's really how it was. But once me and Jimmy and Paul were the people who were doing it at that moment, along came a record company at that moment. So when we decided to make a record, they were the 2 guys with me. And at that point, I wouldn't have changed anybody else because I would still jam with people, but at that point, they were the 2 guys that were there at the time, so, we'll just do it with them. They are now my band. It became a band. It really formed kind of slowly and evolved into what it was. But the band Mahogany Rush was was actually doing gigs in quite large, fields and outside gigs and at schools and stuff in high schools before the nucleus of Frank, Jimmy, and Paul were the three guys.
Totally. And you guys were putting on all these gigs yourselves, and I just wanted to go back to what you were saying with the label. That was 9 records, from my understanding, correct?
Well, the only reason they called it 9, okay, really, the owner of the label had a couple of he had a record label in Detroit that dealt mostly with soul artists, and he had 2 labels, I think, Eastbound and Westbound. And he was partnered with a guy in Canada who lived in our city. And once they decided that they were going to talk me into signing as, to be on their record label, which I really, really avoided for a long time, like almost 6 months, I kept saying, go away, go away. Once they got me to do that by basically promising us equipment, magic word for a young guy, at that point, they said I was into weird stuff like astrology and numerology. Like, you have to understand, my mind was not very, very grounded after the LSD experience. I was like really, really out there. And so they were enamored of the idea that I was into this whole numerological thing, and so they said, well, let's make a label specifically for this artist so that he's not like on Eastbound or Westbound with all the soul artists. And what are we going to call it? Well, let's use the number 9. That's where that came from. I didn't choose it. They started asking me about numbers, and I started telling them something like, well, 9 is a very powerful number, and blah, 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 all that stuff that you read about in, numerology stuff, which I'm really not into anymore. But so they thought, oh, that's cool. Let's call it 9. And actually, before that was the American release. The Canadian guys that had hooked up with the American guy, they called the label Kotai, Kotai, which was from the I Ching, the I Ching. They were also, the guy running that label was also a bit of a basket case, and he was into all that spiritual stuff, and let's call the label this. So that label was also developed specifically for this one band before they had signed anyone else, and then after that they did sign other people. But so both of those early labels were basically put together specifically as a vehicle for Mahogany Rush.
Interesting. Now, going into the recording studio, and I mean, even if you guys didn't want to be signed, how, in your mind, how would you have gotten your music kind of out there without a label, especially back in the early 70s?
Well, because in our mind, don't forget, this all started in 68, 69, before the early 70s, okay? So in my mind, if you wanted to play music, you went and you brought your equipment somewhere and you set it up and you just played. And kids would end up showing up. It wasn't like you were selling tickets. That's what happened. And so that's what I was used to. So in those days, there was a very big difference between what we called the establishment and the anti-establishment, which is what we were, right? Counterculturists. And think hippies, Haight-Ashbury, right? So when the record companies came along, they were basically people from the enemy. They had their suits and their ties. They were like the bad guys. So to say that you were going to make your music with that faction of society was almost like we considered it a kind of a sellout to the devil. So I was very, very reluctant. Don't forget, I was only 15 or 16. Yeah, so I was very, very reluctant to say, yeah, because, I wanted to be, no, those are the bad guys, and so I resisted it. But the way that particular first label got me to be at least slightly interested was, like I said, the guy running that label was a bit of a case like me. He was an artistic sort of person. And really, he wasn't the kind of guy who showed up in a suit. He had sandals on and beads and long hair, okay? So now he got me sort of interested in saying, well, at least if we are going to record our material, at least I'm doing it with a guy who's kind of cool. once we did that with him, that was Kotai, he made a deal with the Americans to come and see the band because we were getting such huge crowds. Nobody could understand how that was happening. So the American label showed up one day and saw what was going on, like it was a movement. And they said, "Oh, we want to sign this thing for America." So Robert Nickford, who was the Kotai guy, he came to me and he said, "Look, there's some people, they want to join with us, and they'll be able to take they didn't even say your records, they said our records, and put them out in the United States and blah, blah, blah." And I was still very reluctant to do that. But then Robert said, "Look, Frank, they'll put you in a recording studio, and you can have all the equipment you need." And I said, "Well, I don't want anybody telling me what to do." And they said, "Well, we'll write it down that you have to be able to be your own producer," which was totally unheard of in those days, to let a 16-year-old kid be his own producer on a record, especially since he'd never done it before. So to me, that gave me a sense of safety from the bad guys. And so I said, "Well, okay." And my parents had to actually sign the contract because I was too young. And my parents didn't know anything. It's like literally a 2-page contract. They knew nothing about that. So they go, yeah, okay, where do we sign? Sign here. Oh, they want to give you a couple of dollars? Okay, so we'll sign. That was kind of thing. No one was looking out for the pitfalls of that, like whether you'd lose your music or they'd own you later, which ended up being the problem. But at the beginning, that's all it was. And so they did put me in the studio. They did go away and never show up until Maxim was finished. And I learned how to record while doing Maxim. I learned that was my beginning of my education with production. What do you do with a microphone? What do you do with a wire? What are you supposed to do with all this stuff? I had to figure it out while writing and doing those songs. The 2 songs on that record are 4-track. They're done in the basement on a tape recorder. So, and the rest are 8 tracks. So this was the earliest iteration. But it's like grade 1, and I ended up with an education. One ancillary note to that is that mistake, that was actually a mistake that they made, was to let the 16-year-old kid do that, in the sense that there's an interesting thing to my career that most people don't go through. And that is this. Usually if a band is on a label, they end up leaving that label for whatever reason, and then they find another label, or another label finds them. That's the usual order of things, and they make a new deal with somebody else, right? In my case, I was sold as a commodity, contract and all, to the next label, who then did that again when I went to Columbia. So the original contractual points that were in my favor carried with me to every deal I had. And every new record company said, "Well, we can't let a kid produce his own stuff when, spend all that money." And basically they couldn't do anything about it. If they wanted the band, they were buying the contract. And so when it ended up at Columbia, which was started at my 4th album, of all the record companies, Columbia just wouldn't have dared let a young person do that. But they looked at the 3 albums I had done and said, "Well, you know what? He didn't do a bad job. So let's let it continue." So for my entire career, I ended up being my own producer because of that one signing when I was 15 years old.
Ah, all right. So let's go to Child of the Novelty. It was released, a couple of years later, which is kind of unheard of for the 70s, because everybody was releasing a record, it seemed, every 6 to 8 months or so. I'm just kind of curious, was there just a lot of touring involved in between Maxim and recording the Child of the Novelty record?
Yeah, no, there was.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of, I really liked playing, okay? So I would play for free. It didn't matter, it was like, oh, we're going to play. But in those days, you didn't have clubs. So you either played high school gymnasiums for like high school dances or whatever, or schools, universities or colleges, or you got on somebody's show that was a real show at the arena, at an arena somewhere, There was no in-between ground where you could be playing at a rock club. There were no rock clubs. That didn't happen until like 1980. So the whole 70s, especially the early 70s, was all about driving, 400 miles to play at somebody's high school. And that's how it was. It was just, where are we going this weekend? And where are we going this week? And, and playing and playing and playing and just having a great time playing. I suppose you could say that those days were the practice room. We never went to a practice room. I never practiced guitar in my life, but I did a lot of playing with people. But, we weren't the kind of band that sat around and said, okay, boys, take it from the chorus. And nope, make it more tight. Doing that whole practice thing that bands do. We never did that. All we did was jam all the time. And it wasn't only with us three. Anybody could come in and jam with us, and often did.
Right. And I always commended you for that when reading your other interviews, was that, you always had said, it didn't matter how you played as long as you can get along personality-wise, and I think that's hugely important.
Oh, absolutely. That's rule one, Tanner. Why would you not make that rule one? Someone should explain that to me. The only reason for not having that as rule one would be, we need to have a really great player so that people can applaud better. That is so antithetical to making music on the fly. Who cares? A guy that can play really amazing stuff, he's gonna make you play amazing with him, and a guy that plays simpler stuff is gonna let you play simpler stuff with him. If you're listening to who you're playing with, you're going to adapt to who you're playing with. What would you do if you were doing a song with your band, and then someone came along and said, "Can I jam with you on the recorder?" A little thing you blow in, the flute, right? That's only got 12 notes on it. What could you expect a guy to really do on a recorder? So you'd have to play to that instrument if you're really listening to him. But most rock bands aren't listening to the other guy in the band. They're only waiting for their chance to have a solo.
Well,
Okay, that's a problem.
Right. It's true. I was just merely saying, from a touring circuit, especially around those days, it's like, that chemistry has to be there, or else the band is ultimately screwed.
Well, the chemistry comes from personality. It has nothing to do with how well a guy plays his instrument. And usually the better players, what we call technically better players, right? Usually it's related. Usually the better they become as physical players, the harder it is to get along with them as people. You start to get a prima donna thing going, hey, that's my lick, and I wrote that, and there's all these arguments about who was better and who was not better. To me, that does not matter. Now, I've had a lot of guys play with me over the years who were in the band, who jammed with the band, and I've always been able to get along with whomever I'm playing with, because there's always a way to let somebody fit in, and that's what's the fun part. The fun part is the doing of it, not the outcome. The outcome is a product of the fun part. And so if you have people that are mentally and spiritually, and whatever word you want to call it, in sync with you, you're going to end up being happier at the end of jam. You might not have done something as amazing as Snarky Puppy, okay? Progressively amazing stuff, but you'll be happy at the end of your jam, even if all you played was 1-4-5. You want to be smiling. Whether outwardly or inwardly, you want to be smiling at the end of the day, and you want to be able to say to your guys, "Okay, guys, come on, let's go get a pizza," like friends.
Absolutely. Just going back to the Child of the Novelty record, I really feel your songwriting just vastly improved from Maxim, and not that there's anything wrong with the Maxim record. But I just think Child of the Novelty had more grit to the overall tone of the guitars, and just,
Sure.
talking about a feeling is just one of the great fucking
Well,
riffs.
that's the part. Yeah, that's the part that I mean when I say, you learn as you go. So Maxim, you had a 16-year-old kid being given this machine and said, go make some music and record it. He had to learn how to do that. By childhood and novelty, I said, man, I know why the guitar didn't sound good when I did Maxim. I had the mic in the wrong place. You learn about that, right? And you get some better equipment too, right? So you get like a better console or you get a better tape machine. So all of a sudden that's going to sound better. And by that time, I was modifying pedals. So my entire sound on guitar is based on the devices I use, the amps I use, right? And so by that time I have a better fuzz and I have a more driving, a nicer way of doing echo with the tape machine instead of, the way they did before. I had an Echoplex, So, yeah, naturally it's going to get more. And then that sets up as kind of a baseline. Now you got to do Strange Universe. Well, now you better be going in the, farther. And then you got to do Mahogany Rush 4. You better be going farther, and you just keep going like that.
Totally. Well, I just really feel, and even the artwork improved vastly. Not that there's anything wrong with the Maxim record. Everybody, I always say, don't be afraid to put out a first record. Everybody has to have one, for a band.
Mm-hmm.
I just really feel, how did you get in touch with that specific artist to do the Child of the Novelty artwork, and what was your vision for it?
Well, the Child of the Novelty and Strange Universe covers was me sitting. Remember I told you I used to sit down with psychiatrists and tell them about Mahogany Rush? That was me sitting down with Ivan, an artist. He was a guy that could draw in felt pen. I'd sit down with Ivan and tell him about my acid trip. So that was kind of Ivan's version of me describing where I was in that trip. It wasn't just, let's make a cover that looks cool and looks psychedelic like a lot of 60s posters. It was literally every item on the Child of the Novelty cover and every item on the Strange Universe cover is directly derived from an experience I had had. And so they may not have all happened at the same moment in the experience, but they were clustered into one cover, which is almost like a rebus puzzle, showing all the different things. So if you look at the Child of the Novelty cover and you look in the sky and you see a ship and you see, a tree going off in the sky which got a dog's face on it, these were all individual experiences, visual hallucinations that I lived through and was still living through when I was sitting down with Ivan. And he was trying to draw them. Consequently, his drawings are fantastic, but they're cartoon. They're not like CGI. Whereas the world I lived in was the CGI version, let's say, of what you see on those covers. Imagine if somebody now was able to do those covers with computer graphics and CGI. Put them as real rather than pencil drawings. That's sort of where I live. And that's why those covers were like that. By Mahogany Rush 4, I was not trying to express that as much.
Right.
From every album after.
Right. Well, that's like the 2D version, and you experiencing kind of the 3D. So how do you put a 3D version into a 2D illustration? And I think that he did extremely well on those specific albums.
Ivan was amazing, and he was a very good friend of mine. We sat together a lot, and I was mortified when he died of cancer very young. I was mortified, and once Ivan was gone out of the picture, I certainly wasn't going to go get another guy to do Ivan stuff, out of respect for Ivan. That's his thing. And he was a wonderful person. He was a good friend, and he was a great artist. And I also draw a little. So to me, for me to sit down with Ivan all day, he's basically drawing these pictures. I'm going, it was almost like sitting down with a police sketch artist. he would say, "Is it like this?" And I go, "Well, it's a little more like this." And he'd draw it again, and he'd redo it again, and that's how it was done.
Totally. Well, let's go, because I don't really hear you talk too much on your vocal aspect. It's always the guitar player. It's always sounding like Hendrix. It's always this. But I want to focus.
Yes, I'm not a singer.
Well, I want to focus on your voice real quick. I love the tone of your voice. I'm just kind of curious who your inspirations vocally were speaking. Just the overall tone of your voice is just, it's very warmth sounding. It's very, I just kind of, who were your influences as far as a vocal performer?
Well, my greatest influence was fear, okay, because I really don't consider myself a singer, and so especially early on, I really didn't consider myself a singer. So I figured, I happen to like Jimi Hendrix. I says, well, he gets to talk through his vocals rather than sing, so maybe I should do that too. It's an easier way to do it. It's a lot easier to go wah 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 when you're singing and like you're screaming and talking than it is to actually go ah, and have a note. And so I was so afraid of whether I could or could not sing a note that I would end up talking my way through my early albums. And if you look at that, most of them I'm doing that. On the very early albums, they're talking about a feeling, people always put me down. It's almost like Dylan, right? And Dylan was a very early influence of mine musically, as well as vocally. Just Dylan music, I always loved it. I loved Bob Dylan. So I said, well, if I sort of sing like Bob Dylan, then it's going to sound isn't that kind of what Jimi Hendrix is doing? He's kind of singing like Bob Dylan, but with a different kind of voice. And that was the earliest iterations. But later on, I began to, what they say, find your voice, because I really liked other guys that did sing, and I wished I could do what they did. And I loved Johnny Winter's voice. I thought it was amazing for the kind of music he was doing. But I loved Edgar Winter's voice even more. And then I loved, Greg Allman's voice even more, So it was like an amalgamation of that. I would say, well, let me try to sing it a little bit like Greg Allman did, or let me try to sing this a little bit like Edgar Winter did. Songs like Satisfy Your Soul, it's very much like, Edgar Winterish kind of music. And so it became an amalgamation of the different voices, but you'll notice one thing I do in all the tunes is I sing very little. So I might get away with it for a verse or two or a chorus, but I'm not singing 15 verses like Bob Dylan. It's mostly, a head's got some vocals and there's a lot of music, and then maybe there's a tag to leave the song at the end. I do not consider myself a vocalist, although people have told me, especially after the DVD, people have told me, oh my God, like you can really actually sing really well. And I'm like, okay, whatever. It's very embarrassing. In the earliest days when I had to do a vocal, I'd have to kick everyone out of the studio, and I'd have to tell the engineer, if you solo my voice without music, and I find out about it, I'm going to fire you, because I'm not on the other side of the glass, right? And I don't know what button he's pushing when everyone's hearing me singing dry, I wanted the reverb and the echo and everything just to sort of tune myself,
Well,
so it's funny.
But. Yeah, and I think, obviously when you say you're not really a singer, it's not like your first priority. You consider yourself more of a guitar player, songwriter.
Yeah, it's necessary for me to sing. It's necessary. I didn't want to have a stand-up singer in the band, okay? Because what's that guy going to do when we're doing 24-minute jams? Was he going to dance? Okay, so I didn't want to have that. And I didn't have another guy in the band that could take over the singing duties, because Paul wasn't a singer, and neither was Jimmy. And I wasn't going to change them just because I needed a singer. And it wasn't until the late 70s I brought in a second guitar player, but by that time, and it was my brother, but he wasn't a singer either. But had he been one, maybe he'd have ended up being the singer of the band. It's just trying to be natural, man. It's just, I was never motivated by an end. The ends. With me, it's always the means. Like I'm not doing anything musically that's, to get to this end, we have to do all these things. I'm not interested in the end. I'm interested in the journey, not the destination.
Ah, good line. That's a good line. Let's go to the Strange Universe record. Like you said, this is kind of the point in your career where you had released literally a record every year up until like the late, or the early '80s. A record every
Yeah, I
year.
ran away from I ran away from the label and left the label. Particularly, one of the reasons was that I'm not going to do records every year anymore. I'm going to do a record when I feel like I can have something to say. But go on.
Right. Well, I'm just kind of curious. I mean, this is particularly the first moment in your guys' career where people. This is one of the records that people all the time they always bring up, the Strange Universe record, and I love it as well. I'm just kind of curious what you guys did differently in the recording studio from, what did you learn from the first two records bringing it into the Strange Universe recording sessions.
We basically learned how to do certain things quicker. So, for instance, how to mic the drums, how to do all that kind of stuff. So now there was more time to experiment with other stuff. And my music in the studio is largely extremely experimental. If I had 400 hours to do an album, 350 of them were done experimenting with, and 50 were done actually recording. So to find out what does work, what is cool, what isn't, what doesn't work. So consequently, I became this kind of mad scientist guy who would think up new ways to, hey, what would happen if we put a speaker underwater? And you go through you have to make the plastic bag and the whole thing and to mic it and all that. And then you find out it was just a waste of time. It didn't work. So you end up finding all the stuff that doesn't work as well as the stuff that does work. At one point, I put masking tape. Actually, Billy did it, my engineer. He put masking tape across the entire speaker, like taped up the speaker like tightly, like a bandage, and put little holes in it to see what it would sound like, So we were largely very, very experimental, and there was nothing I wouldn't try, because occasionally it would result in really cool stuff. More often it would be a waste of time. We called it the horse, meaning we were kicking a dead horse. We'd say, think the horse is here today, right? And I would just try new things, and then it was the same thing with amplifiers. Oh, let's try taking this amp and joining it into this amp, and let's turn the speakers upside down and put them against the carpet, and all the different things that you could probably think might be cool. You end up finding a few things that actually do give you, but most of it is waste.
Right.
And that's why Strange Universe gets different than Child of the Novelty. It's the same guys doing new songs written those very days, as I said, but let's do some new techniques to get it to be a little bit different. It wasn't about how good the album would be, or whether it would sell, or whether people would like it. It was like when you're painting something, you don't really care whether people will like it. You're painting a bowl of fruit, or you're painting a scene, the artist who's sitting up in his attic painting stuff, he's not thinking, boy, this will sell. He's trying to paint the tree. And that's basically what my approach was. I'm trying to get sound, auditory art, rather than visual art. And does it make you feel a certain way? And that's really the bottom line. Does it make you feel a certain way when you listen to it? I really couldn't care less what they think of the solo.
Absolutely. I mean, not to get all punny on you, but, I think talking about a feeling's kind of like that, how you feel about the music. Now, obviously you're doing like a record and touring, record tour, that's how it was back in the day. How did you ever get, a moment where, you were kind of burned out from that whole thing? I know you were really young when it happened, but I mean, that's a lot to...
No. Burnt out, you could say that the only time I started to feel that, what you're describing, was much, much later, like in the last, 20 years, simply due to age. So it's like, oh man, do I really have to drive 400 miles every day, after the gig? Like that type of burnt out, okay? But no, all the way through the beginning, all the way through the 70s, no matter what we were doing. Sure, there was times when, because you're on a bus, you wake up, you don't know where you are, and you have to go right to the stage at a rock festival. They've already parked, and quick, Frank, you're on in 10 minutes, Yeah, that's a little bit disconcerting when that happens, but it doesn't happen that often. And quite honestly, the people that complain about rock and roll being a hard life are full of crap. Rock and roll is not a hard life. A hard life is getting up at 6 in the morning and having to go work in a factory and move boxes for your family and not knowing if you can pay the rent, and doing that for 5 or 6 days a week with no hope of ever being rich. That's a hard life. But running around in a rock band, having guys carry your bags, set up your gear, bring you your coffee, bring you your meal, treat you like you're the king, have cars waiting for you at doorways, that is not a hard life, although I hear a lot of these guys complain about it as if it is, and it ain't.
Well,
They're basically spoiled children.
Well, and you're talking about an entirely different time. You're talking about the 70s when, there's a lot of money to be made in that specific industry. The rock world today is not as, vibrant as it was in the 70s.
Sure, it's not. But let me take the rock world today, for instance, or what I know of it, because I'm quite removed from it. But let's assume that I know a little bit about it, okay, or at least things don't. They say there are no new things. There's just new people showing you old things in a new way. And so the rock industry today, nothing is really new about it. It's new people with old things. That's still not a hard life, no matter how you slice it. Even if you take the band that has to go 5 guys in a van, and they're carrying their own gear, and they're eating hot dogs, which we call tube steaks, okay? Compare that to a real hard life. Compare that to the thing I described before, where you have kids, you have a family, you have a landlord who will throw you out in 30 days if you don't pay the rent. And you must every day go to some back-breaking job when the sun isn't even up yet and work till the sun goes down in order to give your $80 or whatever you made to the landlord and to the grocery store. And there's no hope of anything other than that. That's like a sentence. That's a hard life. So when rock guys try to tell you how hard it is to drive in their cars to go do their gigs, while they're picking up chicks and they're doing drugs and they're doing all kinds of things and they're having parties after their show, that is not a hard life. That's just people complaining for nothing and whining. They should have more gratitude that they can even do that, because but for the grace of God, that could be anybody doing what they're doing. Consider this. Go to a concert in a 20,000 seater, right? Of a giant star. Let's take, I don't know, U2 or Stevie Wonder. Let's take Stevie Wonder, giant star, okay? Billy Joel. You got 20,000 people watching this band and watching this artist. Now, not anybody is Stevie Wonder. That's a generational person. You can't replace him. There's not a bunch of Stevie Wonders in the audience. There may be one, but there's not a bunch. But there's certainly a bunch of guys, there's at least 1,000 guys in any audience like that could come down and be the bass player in a pinch. Or even the guitar player of a lot of these bands. Or even the drummer. Or even the keyboard player. If you're really in a pinch, imagine a scenario where you go, oh my God, is there anyone in the audience that come down and play the bass here, please, so we can get through the gig? You're going to find 1,000 guys that can do it. So if that's so true, why do those guys at the end of the gig walk around like they're elite? That could be anybody. They got the job. They were lucky. Most of them are lucky. You're not going to say to the audience, is there anyone come down and sing like Stevie Wonder? No, that's true. Or Jimi Hendrix. That's true. But most of the people in most of the bands that are touring are eminently replaceable in terms of ability. But you can't do that at a baseball game. You can't say, is there anyone in the stands that come down and pitch 96 miles an hour? Or be the shortstop? Or even in a tennis court, pro tennis, or pro hockey, can anyone come down here and be the right winger for the New York Rangers? No. So it makes sense that the sports stars are genuinely the guys that deserve to be there. And even they're lucky because among their friends there are guys that could take their job, but not in the audience. Whereas in rock, we got a whole room full of people that come down and do half those jobs. So why then would you walk around as if you're special? You're not special. Nobody's special. So you have to be grateful for the fact that it's you. That's like really amazing. I'm 66 years old. I just turned 66. I've been doing this since I'm 15. That's 51 years. 14, actually, if you count when I'm learning. And I never had to have a job. I don't know what it's like to go in and punch a clock or have a boss or someone tell me, why are you late? I didn't go to high school. I went 26 days to high school. That is lucky. That's fortunate. I'm grateful for that. Because it could have been a whole lot worse. And that's what I'm trying to say to my friends in the industry when I hear them whining and complaining about their hard job. It ain't hard. Most people give their right leg to be able to do what some of these guys are doing. And they should be grateful for it. And have people cheer for you while you're doing it and want to give you free equipment? Here, come and take our guitar for free. Come and take this amp for free. Come and take this pedal for free. Most of those guys walk into a music store and want the better deal, even though they've got more money than everyone else in the music store who's trying to buy a piece of equipment. And they get the better deal. The guy at the music store wants to ingratiate himself to him and says, I'll get it for you for a third of the price because I'll give you the bro deal. What about those kids that are walking into that store to try to start their band? No one's giving them a bro deal. That's our industry. It's decadent. It's got its head screwed on wrong. And up is down and down is up. Everything's backwards. That's my view. Now, I know a lot of guys get mad at me for saying this. Well, Frank, why did you say that on an interview? Why did you say that about us? After all, get out of here. Come on, man. Seriously. At the end of the day, we're all the same people. I knew bands, listen to this. We'd be on the road really early on, even before the bands were super big, okay? Because I played with everybody before they were big. And even before they were big, we'd finish our opening act stint, and they'd finish their gig, and we're hanging out with our crew, and they've got their crew staying at a Motel 6 and not allowed to stay at the same hotel. Will you figure that one out? Really? That's what happens. Oh, no, the crew's staying there. We're staying at the Sheraton. You see that all the time. You even see that today. Who the heck are they that they should be living like kings and queens, and their own crew, they're going to put them in a Motel 6 or Super 8? Whereas my outlook was, every gig I've ever done, I arrive at 1 o'clock when the load-in is there, and I don't leave till the last person's gone. And I usually am hanging out with the crew guys because they're the only guys who are real. Everyone else is living in an illusion land.
Right. They're living in a strange universe, as it were.
Yeah, come on, man. Me and you, how are we any different, Tanner? How are we any different? You play in a band, you play guitar, I play in a band, I play guitar. Why should I be considered different than you? Or you different than me? Why? Because someone bought records or because I recorded my stuff on wax? I was so lucky to be able to do it, and maybe someone else wasn't. And then you've got bands like yours who have done as many records or more than mine, and no one bought them, or no one knew about them, or they weren't promoted properly, or whatever the reason, and by the dumb luck of the draw, they just didn't get known. But that doesn't mean they weren't good.
It's true. I think though we always look up to people such as yourselves because of your experiences and just I think it all goes back to the experiences that you guys, were living in specifically those times, and doing it before a lot of people were doing it. So I think that plays a part in why we give them so much power. If I can be so honest, these rock stars so much power is because we only think there's only one of them when there's, like you said before, there's not. So.
What some of the guys and some of the other bands who will remain nameless. I did a lot of festivals, right? So I played with a lot of shows where there was 10 bands, 12 bands. The 70s was full of those things, okay? Do you know what I would do is when I play, once I'm done, because I'm opening usually, okay, or I'm in the middle somewhere, I'd, walk out into the crowd or go meet people or, just like a normal guy. And the other people from the other bands whom I got to know would tell me, don't do that. I might say, why? They say, well, if you start hanging out with people like that, they're going to think you're normal just like them, as if that's a bad thing. Well, maybe that is a bad thing from a money point of view, and, it's easier to sell something if you think it's like super and it comes from Mars, but the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, we are all the same. There's a few exceptional, truly exceptional people in the music industry, but you can count them on like two hands. That what I call the generational talent that actually changed the direction of the entire genre. And I named a couple of them before. Stevie Wonder. This is generationally exceptional. Paul Simon, Billy Joel, Jimi Hendrix, two of the Beatles, not all four. Those are generationally exceptional people that don't come along all the time. And they're inimitable, meaning they can't be imitated. But most of the guys, if you make a list right now of the generational musicians as described with the criteria I'm saying, you're going to find out you can fit it on a very small piece of paper. You're going to have to really stretch to fill up that page. So most of the guys aren't that. So most of the guys should be grateful that they're allowed to be in that system.
Yeah.
Because most of the guys are pretty replaceable.
And going back to your journey here, let's talk about 1976 for you. A lot of things happened in your career. Obviously, you played So Bad on the April Wine, the whole world's going crazy record.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me that story of how that came about?
Well, Miles simply called me up and said, Frank, do you want to play on a song? I have a song that sounds like you'd be cool for it. I said, sure.
Oh, okay.
I went in, I played for it. I don't even think I took any money. It was just like, okay, yeah, hey, that's fun. Can I use my fuzz? Because, April Wine didn't use that kind of sound usually. They were more of a radio band with a lot of vocals and stuff. And so when Miles said to me, and I've known Miles forever, he's a good friend, when he said to me, Frank, you want to come in and play on The Whole World's Going Crazy on a song called So Bad, I said, hey, yeah, sure. What do you want? What are you looking for? And he said, no, we want you to be you. Like, don't try to be us. I said, oh, great. I went into the studio, did it, done. Come on, let's go out and have a hot dog, And I did another thing for Miles just a couple of years ago. He did a blues album, and he asked me to play on his blues album, and I did a track for him there. So when those things happen, and occasionally do happen, I don't take anything that comes along. Many, many people have called me and said, do you want to come and play on this record or that record? And it's like, well, I don't really like that music. I want to like what I'm doing. I won't just do anything just for the money. There's a lot of other ways to make money. So, yeah, it's do I like it? I look at it as like an actor who wants to read the script before he chooses to do a certain movie, right? What is it about? If a guy comes along with music that I just don't like, but even if he wants to pay me $100,000, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
I just don't like it.
Right, that goes with some integrity and whatnot. And the other thing that I was looking up, I have no information on Nanette Workman, which was never released. It was a record that you had done in 1976. Can you give me any sort of information?
No, I did it I think it was in 1980.
Okay.
I produced it for her. Nanette is a very, very good singer, extremely good. She's actually American. but she had transplanted herself and her family to Montreal, where we live. And she happened to become, she was a singer who was very famous in her own right in the local area where we are, in Quebec. And so she became the girlfriend of my drummer. So she was traveling with us a bit. And I had her sing on one of my albums. I had her sing the background vocals on a song called Sister Change. And she's singing that. So I said, so Jimmy, said, Nanette's going to be recording another record. Hey, why don't you be the producer? So I ended up being the producer. I played guitar on it. I played bass on it. Jimmy played drums on it, and I produced it as a producer. And it's a pretty good album, but it never came out. And the reason for that was because the people who had put together that, because someone had to pay the studio, someone had to pay for it, right? It was in those studios in those days $120 an hour. Okay, so the people that put together the consortium of investors, let's say, who would pay for the recording of Nanette's rock album, once the album was finished, they all had some kind of a falling out. And then I don't even think they paid the studio bill. I don't remember, but I know there was this whole thing where there was like a problem. And everyone said, well, I own it. And another guy said, I own it. And you know how that goes. By that time, it was done. So we had this really good record with Nanette, and basically me, Nanette, and Jimmy, okay, and a couple of other people, Billy, her brother, who's a very, very talented guy. And then it just never came out because nobody could make a deal. And it just sort of disappeared. I still have a copy of it, and so does Nanette. And me and Nanette have spoken over the years and said, we should put that thing out. And yeah, okay, let's find a way to do it. But it never gets done. It's one of those things that, you called your thing a bucket list thing.
This is a bucket
like
list.
that, one of those. Maybe one day we'll get it together and people will hear that, But it's a good record.
What kind of record is it, if you don't mind me asking? Is it more of a rock-based kind of?
Yes,
okay.
It's a rock blues-based record. There's a couple of cover tunes on it that I thought would be really cool to do. So I had her cover "Born to Be Wild" on it, and I had her cover "Gimme Some Lovin'," the old do 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 boom do 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 do. And instead of the B3 organ doing the main line, I have a great harmonica player named Jim Zeller, who I said, we're going to do the organ lines on harmonica. It's going to be really cool,
Right.
And we produced it like that. So it turned out really cool. The rest of the stuff is written by Billy and Nanette, and I sort of helped along with the directional of how it's going in direction. And it's blues-based, hard blues-based rock, 1-4-5 progressions. And with her, she's got a really great voice for that kind of stuff. Nanette can sort of sing like, if you want, she can sing as Aretha. She can sing like anybody, like she's really, really a gritty sort of blues singer. And so it was a great album. It really is. And her brother Billy's also really, really talented. He's got his own albums out there, Billy Workman. I worked with him on a couple, and I think he got some out at some point. And look, it's a shame, but remember I said before, but for the grace of God, things happen.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to my personal favorite studio record from the 70s, Mahogany Rush 4. Just every track is killer. I love the title track. Absolutely one of my all-time favorite Mahogany Rush / Frank Marino songs. With the acoustic intro, I'm so excited that you put it on live at the Agora, which was amazing. Now I'm just kind of curious. Obviously the album cover. I have no idea what to make out. I have no idea what it's supposed to kind of like represent. Can you give me any insight? Let's just start on the album cover, and then we'll get to some of the musical things.
It's interesting you asked me that, because the whole point of that album cover was to remain secret. And so I can't tell you. When Fido did that cover, a guy named Fido, he's also passed away now. The whole point is, I talked to him about something, okay? And I said, I want this kind of representation in your mind. It's not even in my mind. And so this was his representation of what we had spoken about. And I said to him at the time, you know what, we're never going to tell anybody what this is. We're going to just let people think about it. And so now you're asking me, so I can't tell you. Let's say, out of respect for Fido, I just can't do that. So I wish I could, but you gotta figure it out.
I mean, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask these questions. So now,
Yeah.
now let's go to just the musical. Like I said, this also has Dragonfly, which became kind of like a minor hit for the group. I know in your career, which we'll definitely get to this on kind of why people only like to play your cover versions of songs, which I don't get. Because,
it drives me nuts. Yeah.
Because I feel your original material is just far superior than your covers. No offense. I don't know if that's, that bugs you at all.
So here's the problem.
Yeah. Go for it.
Andrew, here's the problem. No one ever sat down and actually added up how many cover tunes I did on my album. If you take the Black Live album away, which is a live gig, obviously there's going to be covers at a live gig. You're doing blues tunes, you're doing Johnny B. Good, you're doing those kind of things, right? If you remove those from the repertoire, how many cover tunes did Mahogany Rush ever actually do? Not that many.
Well, there's two.
They did Roadhouse Blues.
There's two on Tales.
Norwegian Wood.
Right.
They did Roadhouse Blues, Norwegian Wood, Purple Haze.
All Along Watchtower. Oh, Purple Haze was on live.
All Along the Watchtower.
Purple Haze was on live, though, so you have to take that away.
Okay, so don't even put that in. So three, well, that's three, right? What else?
Oh, my gosh.
That's about it, right? I think Mona is part of the song Mona is on one of the jams on the album. It's not really a full tune, right? So we're talking less than 5.
Right.
In an entire career. And yet, because of the Black Live album, because of the gigs, because we did the Johnny B. Goods and King B and those things, when you're playing live, you do that. It's fun.
Right.
You're doing it for fun. You're not doing it because it's your songs. It's ancillary. It's not part of your show. And because of those moments, somehow this group got thought of as doing cover tunes. Now figure that out.
I can't.
That's the weirdest part. If you actually add it up, this group has done less cover tunes than almost any other band.
Yeah. And like I said, I couldn't figure it out either. When I was reading your book, which comes with the Live from Agora, that was the passage in there, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to ask him about that just to, see what his take is.
But when you actually do the math, you find out that there's a disconnect because this band doesn't do cover tunes generally. Even on the DVD and on Real Live, what's called Red House, that's actually my own blues tune, and I happen to sing the Red House lyrics to it. It's not a 12-bar blues, it's a 16-bar blues. It's completely different. And that was accidental. We were recording the night we were playing the gig in which Real Live did what became Red House. I started my own blues tune, and when I got to the mic to sing line 1, I forgot my words, and I couldn't think. I had like 2 seconds to say something, and I said, well, there's a Red House over yonder because I used to cover it live in the other form. And that became my version of Red House by totally accidentally, but it's not supposed to be. So from that point on, it worked out well. I said, we might as well keep using these words.
Wow.
I'll save my other lyrics for another blues tune. So you have to understand that you're really speaking to somebody who doesn't plan anything. I don't plan for next week or next tour. I don't do that in my life, never mind music. I just don't do that. I live for today. What am I doing now? Right now I'm talking to you. You're the only thing in the world at the moment. That's how I live. I'm not trying to be that way. It's just how I live. It's like saying a tiger eats meat. He doesn't think about it, but he does. He just eats meat. That's what he does. You drop a rock from a roof, it falls. Rocks fall when let go. That's what I do. I live for the moment or the day that I'm in, and if I picked up a guitar now, I might play something completely different. Like I happen to love Tony Bennett, so sometimes I do Tony Bennett tunes.
With Mahogany Rush 4, this was actually the first record that was actually on Columbia, the major label.
Yes.
I'm sure that had some sort of, doing when it came to the popularity of, how Dragonfly became like a minor hit for the band.
Sure.
Now, I want to go to World Anthem. This is like the first time where the Frank Marino got added onto and Mahogany Rush, so it's like now Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush instead of just Mahogany
That was
Rush.
the beginning of the trouble. That was the beginning of the problems with Columbia. Remember I told you they didn't like the idea that they had bought the contract and I was the producer?
Okay.
Right? Well, from that point forward, every single day that I ever interacted with that label was an argument over something. They just made problem after problem after problem after problem for me. And at one point it was the name of the band. And at that point, they did not even want to keep the words Mahogany Rush. They just wanted Frank Marino. And to keep Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush, which I thought was way too long, that was a compromise. They wanted to just completely get rid of the Mahogany Rush word.
Now, why?
Because they said, no, it's easier to sell you as a star.
Oh.
You know, this whole thing they're doing with Ted Nugent. Because don't forget, Ted Nugent had a band called the Amboy
Correct.
Dukes.
Right.
It became Ted Nugent on Epic. Didn't become the Amboy Dukes.
Right.
You know? So they were into this whole thing. Think about Stevie Nicks and this one, all the single names that they were selling as single names. And their argument was, well, come on, Frank. I mean, you know, everyone's coming to see you. You're the guitar player. And I took that as an insult to my guy.
Right. Right.
I said, what, am I supposed to go tell the guys, come on, everyone's coming to see me? Like, that's kind of like, you know, it's like walking around with your picture in your pocket and giving it to people.
it's
You know, it's kind of stupid.
Right.
And I do know guys
Right.
that do that. Okay? But no, so that was the beginning of the war. That first thing was the beginning of the war. And if you'll notice later on, they did have an album with just Frank Marino on it, Power of Rock and Roll, a cover they did without me agreeing to it, even though they weren't allowed to. They just did the cover, boom, and I think it's the worst cover that's ever been done in the history of rock and roll.
oof.
At least it's not like my music. If they think that cover is what I mean when I say the power of rock and roll, if they think that it's something that looks like it came out of a cartoon from a Playboy magazine, that's not what I think is the power of rock and roll. And that was the beginning of the total end, and then the Juggernaut album was the same thing, and then finally I left.
Right. What?
I left. I still had an album to do for them at my option. It wasn't even their option, it was my option. And I said, I'm not exercising the option, I'm walking away, and I did exactly that. And everybody thought I was crazy because I was playing big buildings at a major label, and I'm walking away. You know how many people quit my act when I did that? All the crew, band members. What are you doing? What are you doing? This is our ticket. No way, man. I ain't playing this game no more with these
Right.
people. As far as I'm concerned, they're the devil.
Well, you know, just going back to the World Anthem record, you know, the cover I love. It's, you know, it's kind of like a cowboy riding the earth with like a rope. It's just it's very visually, I guess, stimulating. But the song, once you put on the vinyl, I mean, Requiem for a Sinner is just one of the all-time great fucking opening tracks. It's just I don't. It's super. Like I said, there's more grit on the guitars as opposed to, you know, the last efforts, and great fucking record. And obviously, World Anthem. I mean, that could have been. You could have used that for the Olympics. It's just super powerful and epic.
It was written for the Olympics. It was written for the Olympics.
Oh, really?
So, yes, the World Anthem. When I wrote the World Anthem, there was a contest for the '76 Olympics for songs to be used for the Olympics. And so my guy Paul, another Paul, not Harwood, said, you know, why don't you write something for the, you know, Olympics? So my idea was, okay, I'm going to write an instrumental piece, right, that doesn't have lyrics, but that'll have printed lyrics. And if it's all done in quarter notes, you could translate those lyrics into any language, and they'll sing in any language. It should work. And it does. You can sing it in English, French, you name it, Italian, German, whatever. And then when I handed it to what ended up happening was it didn't end up going to the Olympics, and I still wanted to use it because of the idea of the song. And so I handed it to Columbia, and as usual, like clockwork, it was an argument. No, we're not going to put all the lyrics. We'll put 20 languages. I said, but it's no good if you exclude 80 or 90 languages. You've got to have all the languages. Otherwise, it's not a world anthem. It's something anthem. No, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. And we're particularly not going to use Russian. And I'm like, what's up with you guys?
Right.
Really? You know, they're the evil empire. Oh, my gosh. Oh, come on. Get off it. I'm writing a world anthem here. I'm not trying to change the world. So anyway, it was another fight over the world anthem. They completely misunderstood it. So you see, I'm only on the second album with these guys, and it's starting. Then the Black Live album was another one. That's actually a double record, but they wouldn't put out the second vinyl.
Interesting.
They wanted a single vinyl. So all the other record that had Strange Universe and it had, you know, Poppy and Look at Me, no, that never came out.
Wow, because I was going to...
So it was another argument.
I was going to ask about that too, because literally on the vinyl it says, "We're sorry we couldn't fit everything onto one single vinyl." And
yeah, do you see how angry I was?
And my question was going to go towards, you know, because they had double records. You know, you had Double Live Gonzo and...
Of course, but they wouldn't do it for me.
Oh.
Listen, you're right. They wouldn't do it for me. That's why the cover's just black. Everything was like from day one, what can we do to make this guy so uncomfortable that he'll knuckle under and let us do what we want? But I had the goods on them because of the original deal. They did not want me as a producer, and they didn't even want me to keep my band members.
Really?
Yeah, really. In their mind, it was like, hey, if we put Frank with this guy and that guy, you know how they like to put people together and make these stupid super bands?
Right.
You know they do that. They did that for a while. Oh, we'll get this guy to play with that guy. Like, it got so ridiculous, they ended up having like rock stars doing records with Pavarotti. It was like ridiculous.
Right.
That attempt to sell more, you know, widgets, which is their whole thing, is selling widgets. These are not the people that should be running music. I used to say it all the time. Business has no business in the music business.
Yeah.
These are the wrong people running it. You know, it's not so odd. When you think about Hollywood's version, when Hollywood would do a movie and they would show you their image of a hippie, it was this fake kind of weird image with a Volkswagen bus and flowers in their hair, and that's not what hippies were. That, you know, Hollywood's version of the Beatles was the Monkees. But that's not the Beatles.
Yeah.
They have this fake idea of what anything real is. They think that they can go to Madison Avenue and bottle it. Hey, this would be cool. But those guys shouldn't even belong in the dressing room of the band. Let alone handling their music. And that's the same today. That hasn't changed.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's music and business. The business aspect tends to be the more important, unfortunately. Yeah. So totally.
I mean, music. That's one of the reasons I don't like tablature. You know, guys ask me, why is there no tablature for your stuff? Well, I don't believe in it. Why don't you believe in it? Because you're using your eyes for something that's going to be fed to the ears. Use your ears for your ears. Use your eyes for your eyes. Listen to music. Listen to music. Don't look at music. Listen to music. Everything you ever learned, when you learned to speak, you didn't do it with your eyes. You did it before you went to school. You learned words by hearing them, and by osmosis you ended up learning what they were and assigning words to. You had those feelings, you know, things that had words for you, like mother, father, ice cream, food. You still had the feelings for mother, father, ice cream, food before you knew what to call them. And then people taught you by sound what to call them. And you ended up speaking a language, whether it's Italian or English or French or whatever. It started with the ears, and it's still the ears. A conversation, you had a conversation long before someone taught you how to spell it. Music is that. You want to listen to it, trust your ears, you'll play it, don't worry. And so tablature is going in the wrong direction, and you're giving a kid something with numbers on it, and he's looking at it and placing his fingers in a certain point. And in the end, he does play it. Yes, he does. But the association that he's made with it is totally from his eyes. He's not even listening to the sound anymore. I bet you somebody who's good at reading tablature can play the piece perfectly in a room where there's so much noise you can't hear them. That's a disconnect. That's ridiculous. Violinists will tell you, even though they do read, they have to read because they're doing the kind of music was only ever written in the first place. They can't play in a room where they can't hear their violin because they don't have frets. They got to be able to hear the tuning to adjust on the fly. And a voice. Could you really do tablature by voice? Could you sing by tablature?
Probably not.
How would you tell the vocal cords to get to the right pitch if you're not listening? And yet anyone can sing. No one can explain why when you sing Happy Birthday, you're all in the same pitch in the room, or when an arena says, we will rock you, or at a soccer game, they're all in the same pitch. All these people that think they can't sing, they can all sing. Where's the connection between the brain and the vocal cord? It's in the listening to it. But try to sing if you can't hear yourself, and yes, you can't sing. So music should not be taught by the eyes.
Going back to, like I said, the World Anthem, you released literally a record every year until like about 82, and this is kind of like the halfway point, and you obviously were fighting with the label a little bit more. I love the production of this, and I love that it was obviously the live record came out after, which was my introduction to your career. I love the sound of Frank Marino Mahogany Rush live. I do wish it was a double record like you had expressed earlier, but from what we got of it, I mean, it's I don't know. I think it's truly timeless, especially the song Dragonfly, especially the gentleman opening up the record. It's just one of the all-time greats for opening up a record.
It's a rather iconic record. But what Mahogany Rush Live represents is Mahogany Rush Unchained. Okay, so in other words, when we did Mahogany Rush Live, people said, hey, they're going to be recording you for 12 shows because there's going to be a live album. Oh, yeah, okay, whatever. Here, put the mics where you like. It wasn't a plan. It was like, okay, yeah, sure. And so we're not out there on the stage thinking, come on, boys, this is for the live album. It's like having a photographer walk around with you and take pictures all the time. You're not always thinking you better pose. You're just being yourself. So what you're capturing on Mahogany Rush Live is you're capturing the band just being unchained, just doing what they would normally do. And yes, the guitars are more distorted and they're louder. It's not all controlled like in the studio. It's completely unchained. And then you get into the studio and it's like, I got to make 40 minutes out of this. Like 15 hours of stuff here. Okay, well, we'll take Dragonfly from that show and we'll take the answer from this one. We'll put them together and make it one show. We couldn't. There's a lot of stuff on those tapes. When we recorded the Mahogany Rush Live tour, a lot of stuff wouldn't fit on the record. That's why there needed to be a second vinyl for Poppitt and for Strange Universe, which is like 20 minutes long. So that's Mahogany Rush Unchained, and that's the other, what I call the other Mahogany Rush, the one that does the rock, the blues, the 145, the rock and roll Mahogany Rush. But that's not the Mahogany Rush on all the records. That's a totally different Mahogany Rush, like in terms of the style.
Totally. And I really do feel it should have been a double just because I loved the sound of it. I wanted more. But what can you do, Now, in your opinion, do you ever think we will see any more from those specific sessions in the near future?
Well, certainly not in the near future, okay? But in the future, possibly. But certainly not in the near future because a lot would have to happen for that to happen. I still have disputes with Columbia to this day over whatever happened to my music. And, look, not just Columbia, even the first 3 records, I had to get permission to play those songs on my DVD. And I have to pay for it. Big money. Now, I could have not included them because I have 6 hours on the DVD. I could have said, okay, take these songs off. But what then would it be if I wouldn't have had certain songs on there? It would be ridiculous. So I wanted those songs. So I made, I said, okay, how much do you want and how much do I have to pay you? And so I don't make a whole lot of money on this DVD, trust me. I'm never going to buy myself a house, that's for sure.
Right. Well, I mean, but it's well worth the money for those. And like I said,
I think it is. I think it is. I think it's the greatest. I think it's the greatest piece of editing and production I've ever done.
yeah,
Ever.
I would agree. I have some nitpicks, which hopefully we can get to. But overall, it's like one of the best for sure. One of the best DVDs I've ever seen when it comes to a live show aspect.
Well, I can't compare it to other ones because honestly, I never watched one. Okay, so I don't know. I've only ever seen one other DVD. That was McCartney back in the U.S. Whatever. Okay,
Right.
That was it. I've never seen another one, and I asked many people when I was doing this one, listen, how does it measure up to other ones? Because I never saw another one. I don't know what it's supposed to be. Like I'm in the dark here. I'm just doing what I think it should be. And everyone has always told me it measures up fantastic, like it's great. I'm saying, oh, good, I'm glad you think so. But I couldn't tell you what people do on their DVD. I know that the times I've seen on TV, you see sometimes things on television from a person's concert, and I quite honestly find that there's much too much camera movement, and they're showing the crowd, and they're showing women with their T-shirts up, and it's like the lights and the lights. I'm like, what has that got to do with the music? Well, why are they showing all that? To make people excited? Like what has that got to do with the music? Aren't you buying something so you can hear it? Aren't we selling music, not pictures? So I'm a little disconnected from the video world, but I think from an editing point of view, from a production point of view, I think I can't say it's the greatest thing ever done, but it's certainly the best I've ever done of my stuff. That I can say. And the fact that there are now video renditions of songs like Requiem for a Sinner, which we very rarely actually played live, and some other tunes that are on there, there's 57 tracks. So, yeah, I'm happy with how it turned out.
Absolutely. And like I said, we'll get to it, later on. But for now, let's focus on, the reaction to, Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush live. Was there initial, buzz around the live record or?
Yeah. I mean, you could almost call that the beginning of our rise to headlining.
Okay.
And that was the record. Listen, I had a record company that was upset that it did well. When it came time to do the next record, they were upset that they had hoped live would die because they didn't want to do it. They tried everything to make it not come out. And yet, that's the only one they still sell in their catalog 50, 40 years later or whatever. So obviously it did a hell of a lot better than they expected, which shows you that they're not in touch with the fans. Sure, it did very well. They never paid me, but it did do well. I could tell by the crowds.
And now going to the Tales of the Unexpected, I know you had loved, like I said, have read and heard your other interviews, and, you guys are, you succeed at the live aspect. And I like the fact that you guys did, side one was the studio versions, and then the side B was just all live tracks that never made it onto other, other albums. And I'm just kind of curious with side B, how many times did you actually play those tracks live? Was it just all one takes, or did it come from 12 shows?
Well, we certainly played some of them. We certainly played some of them after that record came out.
Right.
More, because once the record's out, you're like, okay, let's try this now, But I got to tell you, some of the questions you're asking me are very valid questions if you're asking them to a person who does things the normal way. Then those questions have answers. But you're talking to a person who does not, everything I do is on the fly. You could say that I'm jamming my life. I'm not playing to a script. My whole life is a jam. And I'm sure you've been in enough jams, Tanner, where you start playing, you might play a song you never played in your life because the guy with you somehow did a rendition and you just go off on a tangent, right? So you don't know how that happens. It just happens, right?
Absolutely.
It's not planned, and and quite honestly, when I do have to plan something, because occasionally we do have to plan things, kind of irks me. So I'll end up passing off the planning of things to other people around me, like my wife or someone else. You plan it and let me know when you need me. Like that type of.
Right.
Just call me when you're ready for me to play, like that type of thing. Because I don't want to plan anything, whether it's songs or what I'll have for dinner, or if I'll go out or not tomorrow. It's tomorrow now. Oh, I think I'm going to the store now, but that was never planned. I don't like to plan. I hate doctor's appointments because they're appointments. When you wrote me and you said you want to do this thing on such and such a date, I said, remind me the day before.
Right.
Because I would not have remembered.
And I highly respect that.
At all.
Well, I highly respect that. And with planning, though, I mean, for touring, you have to kind of plan. There's no other way to tour with.
So you have good people, and you say, well, they want us to do all these gigs in September and blah, blah, blah. So you talk to him and let him talk to him, and you talk to them and let me know when it's time for me to go. I don't.
Right.
So I get a lot of emails that people say, Frank, are you coming to so-and-so, or, I'm going to see you. And I don't know how to answer. Sometimes I have to actually call the agent. I say, I want to answer this email for a guy. He's asking me a question. Can you tell me what I'm supposed to say here? Because I don't know the answer. They go, yeah, okay, you're going to be there and blah, 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 blah. And I write it down. Thank you very much. I know it sounds a bit weird, but I'm a bit of a strange person in that regard.
No, but I totally respect it. I'm trying to bounce the ideas and make sure it's clear.
You know where I do plan, Tanner? You know where I do actually do all my planning, and very, very meticulously? Very meticulously.
What's
ridiculously meticulously. When I'm building electronic pedals and amplifiers, designing. Then I plan.
Now, is that because you have to when it comes to electronics? Because if you don't, it kind of all goes by the wayside?
Yeah, because if you don't plan it, you won't end up with the sound you're trying to get. Or you might end up with a fire.
Right.
Of course you have to plan that stuff, and it has to be very specific and to the nth degree. You're looking for a filter capacitor in parallel with a coil. You want to know what the frequency response is going to be if you do that. So you have to plan that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how I get my sound. I build my own pedals. I build my own amps. I do all my own tones. So, I have to plan for something like that. And when I was racing cars, which I was, racing dragsters, building dragsters, yeah, of course, in that kind of thing you plan. So I'll plan the stuff that's supposed to be done by left brain, analytical stuff. But I'm not going to plan anything that's being done by right brain creative stuff like music.
I can respect that. With Tales of the Unexpected, the artwork is super iconic, in my opinion, to your career. It's one of the great album covers, in my opinion, especially for the 70s. Can you walk me through your idea of that specific cover?
It isn't even really my idea. It's my idea when you tell it to an artist. You go, something a little bit mysterious, something a little bit cool, you get left. I'm a big believer in allowing other people to give their impression or to do their thing. I'll give you an example. My drummers, as opposed to in most other bands, the only criteria for drummers to play with me other than being a good guy is that they must be willing to play more rather than less. Whereas in most other bands, they tell drummers, no, don't do so much. So I don't want the musicians not being who they are while I'm jamming with them. And it's the same thing with the artist. I don't, in the case of Strange Universe, of course, and the stuff I did with Ivan, I'm actually trying to describe something to him. So yeah, that's different. But in most other cases, if you tell an artist, I'd like you to do the cover and, show me a few things that you've got based on our conversation, and that comes back and you go, oh, I like that one, so let's use that one.
I like it. I mean, I like I said, I love the cover of this. My only complaint, I just wish there were more studio tracks with that, had that same kind of
Well,
production
there
as
are,
Sister Change. It's
because
just
the reason that's called
oh.
Tales of the Unexpected is because there was a whole other album done, and then I didn't like it and did that. And that's why it's called, wow, Tales of the Unexpected. Look what we ended up with. That's what the name meant.
So are you? Okay.
So it
Are
was
there?
like there's these other tunes that I did. Obviously, I don't have those masters, but, there's these other tunes that were totally like the studio side.
But because you like the live aspect more, you decided to.
I don't
That's
know.
why
I
I
found
love.
before I went and did the sides that we did, right, that we ended up with, I found maybe the stuff I was doing was breaking my own rule. It was maybe a little too much like World Anthem.
In what respect?
Musically,
In
it was
what
a little
regard
too polished. It was a little too many harmony guitars, And it was like, you know what? I don't want to do this. And so I started over.
Okay. And like you said, you never writ. I mean, it was only what 2 times in your career where you actually wrote a song before coming into the studio. So this was probably day of
it was
kind
all
of
day
stuff.
Of.
You would go into the recording studio, right?
Like Norwegian Wood. To give you an example,
Right.
Norwegian Wood only became Norwegian Wood because that technique that I'm using, it sounds like a tapping system, like tapping on the guitar. It sounds like a harp. I was doing that anyway, like for other things, and I said, hey, I can sing the words to Norwegian Wood to this that very day. And so that became Norwegian Wood. It wasn't a plan to do Norwegian Wood, it just worked.
I love it. That's what I always appreciate about like your kind of cover versions. The few and far between ones that you did was, they didn't sound like the originals. You did it the Frank way.
Well, in the case of All on the Watchtower, it's the Frank way, but I was careful to use parts of the Hendrix, let's say, iconic line, okay, in the breaks, because to me that is the song. So you don't want to change it so much that you lose what the original is, right? So if you were to look at it in form of, for instance, a painting, if someone did the Mona Lisa their own way, they might draw a completely different woman, but they'd make sure the smile was similar, because that's what it's all about on that original. You wouldn't change entirely. So in the case of All Along the Watchtower, the smile of the song is the breaks that Hendrix plays in between the verses. And so that's similar. The rest of it's quite different. The singing is different, the beats are different, the intro is different, the outro is different, but the main parts are there so that you say, this is what we're doing. But another side note to All Along the Watchtower was it was simply my version of covering a tune, knowing full well that I was going to get that, another cover tune argument, right? And then I would be able to say to them, but it's not Hendrix, it's Dylan. Because I was getting the Hendrix clone thing all the time. So I chose Watchtower specifically because A, Hendrix had done it, and B, Dylan had written it. And when I did get the invariable, guys from newspapers who would say, hey, he covered Jimi Hendrix again, I'd say, ha, 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 that's not Jimi Hendrix. That's Dylan's tune with a Jimi Hendrix line in it. It's my way of sort of thumbing my nose at those guys.
I like it. Now let's go to 1980. Very different time. And I also want to kind of backtrack a little bit. How much of your contemporaries played a role just in your overall influence either in terms of the songwriting styles or any of that? Did any of your contemporaries kind of come into it?
Other than Hendrix,
with you playing so many shows?
Yeah,
right.
Honestly, yes. So Quicksilver was a big part of it. Quicksilver Messenger Service, huge part of who I am. Probably more than Hendrix. I know that sounds weird, but I was way more influenced by Quicksilver and the Grateful Dead than I was by Hendrix. and it doesn't show, but it's true. And then, of course, Johnny Winter was a very big influence on me. The way that he approached blues and rock and roll was a very big influence on me. And Santana was an influence on me, not from a guitarist perspective, but from the musical perspective, was another one. And the Allman Brothers was another one. So yes, there were many influences, but there were some that weren't necessarily rock. So like I said, I was super influenced by the Beatles, like super much. But more the George Martin Beatles, the later Beatles. That was a big part of my influences. And you get a little of this, a little of that. It becomes who you are. I was amazed because just about a month ago, 2 months ago, somebody played me an old 1960s, early 60s video. Was obviously a film of Albert King playing on TV, And when I looked at it and heard it, I said, hey, he's playing Hendrix lines with the same tone. And this is before Hendrix. Most people don't know that.
Yeah.
But when you see it, it's not just blues.
Yeah.
It's literally like Hendrix style. You see where Hendrix got his lines. Hendrix didn't invent these lines. Albert King was playing them, and they're identical. They're identical lines that you hear Hendrix play in some tunes. So even he had those influences. He became an amalgamation of everything that made him who he was. And I became an amalgamation of everything that had made me who I was. Like I said, there are no new things. There's just new people doing old things.
Right. Well, in your career, when it came to the 1980s, obviously everything was getting heavier. In the 1980s, that's what it was. Loud guitars and like you said, all the metal stuff kind of got heavier. And I can really hear it in the opening track on "You Gotta Live In." Just super hard hitting. I love the album cover. Going back to your drag racing days, obviously. I think that was one of the cars you had raced with or something.
That is a racing car, yes. It was this, high 7, low 8 car, pro stock car. And my interest in that whole thing was more the building of it than the driving of it. I had street cars. I used to be a street racer too, but my whole interest was in making a 1,400 horsepower gasoline engine that would do the quarter mile in 7 seconds. So, that was my interest in cars. But the music, rock and roll at that time, the rock and roll world was very much like the drag racing world. If you went to the drag racing world, you went to the drags, you saw the same thing, big crowds of people having fun in the sun and cheering, and it was exactly the same thing as a rock concert, except instead of bands, there was funny cars and top-fuel dragsters making the ground shake, So there's a correlation between those two things. That's why I got into it. Why I didn't stay in it was I can't afford it. Otherwise, I'd still be in it today. But it was ridiculous. Can't afford it.
Yeah.
Too much money. If I had become a famous guy with a lot of money like some of these rock stars, I probably would still be in it. But I never made any money as a rock and roll musician. I haven't bought a house to this day.
That's seems kind of weird because I thought, there's always been this notion where everybody in the 70s there's either two scenarios: A, you got ripped off or way for everything, or you made a bunch of money.
I'm in the category of ripped off, and I'm not alone.
Right.
I'm not going to whine about it.
Right.
Because
Absolutely.
There's probably a million guys that happened to like me. I'm just one of many. But it's true. There was the two tiers. There were the ones that made the fortune, and there were the ones that made nothing and got their music stolen and everything else. So I'm one of those. That's just what that's just the cards life dealt me. That's neither fair nor unfair. It's what ended up happening.
But we still have a body of work that just is unmatched, in my personal opinion. And when going to what's next, your approach to this record as opposed to the 70s output. This is your first album in the 1980s.
What's Next had a different approach. You're astute to pick that up. When we did What's Next, the studio that we worked in was always a typical, control room, recording room, the big glass, the whole thing. And they also had an unfinished room in the back that was gigantic with a stage on it. They were going to build it one day and never got around to it, type of thing. It was still in cement, like with a wooden stage at one end. Like almost like a basement, but big with 14-foot ceilings. And when What's Next came along, it was like, hey, let's do the whole album in that room. Let's do it as if it's a gig. Let's do that kind of music.
Okay.
And you're connected to the studio, but even though we were connected to the studio, we didn't even use the studio. We brought a guy with a truck to record it as if it was live. we rented the studio just to get the space, to use their space, but we actually recorded it to the tape machines in the truck. And we just went there and, okay, once we'd done all the recording, then we walked into the studio, mixed it in the studio, regular studio. But the approach to the music was, let's get that energy thing going. And that's why you got songs like You Got Livin' and stuff. That's basically like another version of Mahogany Rush live.
Right. That's why I'm saying I love that you brought the live aspect when it came to most of these records.
Like Something's Coming
you
Our
did
Way,
things,
which I think is one of my favorites on that record. That's so indicative of what we would do live if we were playing live. There's no overdubs. There's one rhythm overdub. You know what I'm saying? There's not a whole lot of harmony guitars. It's just, it's yes. There's the lead, the rhythm, the bass. The lead, the bass, the drums, the vocal, and maybe a rhythm guitar that I would overdub for the rhythm. And that's the raw sort of raw live version, but done in the studio, so that you could pick up on that energy, which is always very hard to get in an actual studio setting. Because think about it, you go in a studio setting, you got low lights, you got nice pink walls, you got soft carpets, it's very hard to say, okay, let's rock out here. It doesn't feel right. It's disconnected.
Right. Now, the overall, I guess, response to, a new decade for you guys, how much different was it as opposed to your 70s output?
You mean What's Next?
Yes.
How different was that compared to what? I didn't understand the question.
Sorry. So, the initial reaction to, this is the first, like I said, the first one of the 1980s for you.
The reaction to What's Next compared to the other stuff? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Compared to the 70s stuff,
Look,
yes.
The way it's always been, the answer to that question is basically the same answer to every album I've done. Those people that were fans already never stopped being fans. No one came along and when I did a new kind of album and said, oh, I don't like them anymore. What would happen is that core group would always be the core group of people that supported the music that we did. And you'd occasionally see that you had new ones or not. So it's a continuum that's constantly moving. If there's one thing that I heard from fans almost all the time that was not a good thing to hear was, why don't you play more of your early record songs when you're playing live? Why is there two versions of Mahogany Rush? Why are they so different? They're both Mahogany Rush, but if you only know the live version, you'd never think to even hear the studio. And if you only love the studio, you'd be surprised when you heard the live one. You think it's a different group, but it is the same. And What's Next is kind of like more towards that live side. So people that would have liked songs like Look at Me or, Moonlight Lady might say, well, why are you doing this and not more of that? Why aren't you doing more of Child of the Novelty? The DVD attempts to put all of that together in one thing. Well, we do the Child of the Novelty, and we do For the Emperor, and we do Requiem for a Sinner, and we do all that early recorded music, but we're doing it live, along with Hall of Fame and the rock and roll stuff.
And this is also the first record where you brought on a fourth musician, which was
That's
your brother
correct.
Vince. What did he bring more to the table?
Look, when I did records before, you notice there's always rhythm guitar tracks on all of my early records. There's the lead soloist, and there's a lot of rhythms going on there, okay? And a lot of harmony.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, when I brought Vince in, it was because Vince is an extremely accomplished player. Very good. As a matter of fact, he's probably the only guy I know that can do what I do exactly like I do it if he has to. Not that he does, but he can. So he seemed like the perfect guy to come in and do all those other parts and yet still be able to do more, harder to do things. Unfortunately, he needed his own space. You can't take a good guy like that and just always have him as the rhythm player who gets to do very little. It's not fair to him. It's not fair to the people, quite honestly, either. So it couldn't last. It went on a little bit, but then it just couldn't continue. So I started looking for other guys to fill that rhythm spot, to put in those chords and those harmonies that are necessary in certain of the tunes. But I never really found another Vince.
Okay. And obviously, because he was your brother, he probably bonded on that aspect as well.
I knew him all his life.
Couldn't.
I have another brother, who's an older brother, Norman,
right?
Who's a very accomplished bass player, and if anything, Norman thinks more like me in terms of the world, because he was the older brother when we were in the hippies. He basically brought me into all this stuff. Personally, we're more alike, me and Norman, but we didn't necessarily share all the same ideas about how to go about doing music in a band. You know what I'm saying? So that we did play together in the beginning. Norm was one of the earliest bass players in my band, if not the earliest.
Yeah.
So we get along great as people, and we have the same ideology. It just didn't materialize. It could have. It just didn't. Nobody's, even wondering why. It just didn't, Norm had his own thing going. He played for many, many years in a, he loves the Grateful Dead, so he played it many, many years in a Dead tribute, even when it wasn't popular to do tributes. And so he had his own thing going like that.
Now let's move forward with the power of rock and roll. I do want to definitely get into the album cover that you had mentioned earlier, and just kind of what had happened. Obviously, this is the first time of a couple of records where it was just Frank Marino, and I think you had mentioned earlier that it was done without your permission. But as in terms of having a creative standpoint, in your contract, did it not specifically state that you had creative control over the album covers as well, or was it just for the producer? Okay.
But they started breaking the rules. Yeah, it was stated, but I like telling new bands that come to me for advice about what they should put in their contract. I tell them, well, you only look at a contract twice, when you sign it and when you sue. So it really doesn't matter what's written. If they're going to screw you, they're going to screw you no matter what's written, and you've got to be willing to sue. Take them to court. And if you're not willing to do that, then they can do whatever they like. And that's what they did. Because I was in no position to take them to court. So that's the war. The war was escalating now. They pushed the envelope. They moved the goalposts. Oh, let's just do his cover, even though we're not allowed. Oh, let's just name the band, even though we're not allowed. They started doing that. They got away with that for 2 records, and then I left. Because there was no way to enforce anything anymore on them, because they were just going to break the rules. And once someone just decides to break the rules and dares you to sue them, you've got two choices: sue them or walk away. I walked away. You think I wanted to be one of those musicians that spends the rest of his life fighting the last war in court and paying for it? No way. I said, you know what? Keep it. I'll write new stuff.
Let's move forward to the Juggernaut record. Huge influence on my particular playing with Strange Dreams, and even the title track, Stories of a Hero, Midnight Highway. So there's a bunch, Free. I'm just kind of curious, you used like a Frank Rosetta album cover on this particular.
I don't even remember how that happened.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't. I tried to remember, how did we get that? How did that happen? I don't remember. I know there was one of those let's find a cool cover thing. Somebody, I don't even remember who even put it together. At that point, I was so addled with what they had done again, and how they took Strange Dreams and they killed it, and they literally killed it. That at that point, from the minute the record was finished, I was trying to leave. I didn't even want to know. I just said, I have to get out of this record company. And when the lawyers told me, well, you do have, you're the one with the option. Usually the record company picks you up on their option, right? But in my deal, I had the option for the last record. And they said, you could always just not, just say you're not going to exercise your option like they do all the time. But, you'll lose a lot of money if you do that. And I said, fuck the money.
Right,
excuse my expression. I said, okay, I'm leaving. That's it. Just tell them I'm gone. And of course, invariably came back the you'll never do it, and if you ever do it, you'll never work in this industry again. That whole type of thing. And nobody believed I'd actually do it because I was riding high. I was playing big stuff. And I just did it. And I said,
what?
That's it. No more fighting. No more. I'm going to make albums when I want, and people might like them and might not like them. They may never sell a copy, but you know what? At least I'm marching to my own drum, and the rules are my rules, and no one's going to break them on me.
Totally. Now I want to go back to a point that you had mentioned. What do you mean they killed Strange Dreams? As in, like, obviously there's no solo to this track, right? I'm sure there was.
Right, the only one I ever did with no
right,
solo.
and it's also the one track, and I'm sure you're grateful for this, where it is played on FM radio stations or
Well, that's what I mean,
right,
Tanner. That's what I mean when I say they killed it. It was the only track I ever had that reached number one on the radio, and it was big for 6 weeks. And I'd spent 12 years of my life being told, as soon as you get the one hit, everything changes, right? Well, here we all of a sudden, by accident, it was by accident that it became a hit. Nobody promoted it. It just happened. It happened because of one guy at one radio station. And it became this giant hit. We went to see Columbia. We said, we finally got the hit. Are you guys going to finally help the band properly? And they didn't even know we had the hit. The president of the company actually said to me when I went into the office with my guy, he actually said, I have no way of knowing if this is true. Like as if I would walk into his office and lie about having a hit. I have to prove it by showing him all the charts, and he's supposed to know these things. And so then we left that office being told, great man, everything's going to be taken care of, you'll see. And we left feeling pretty good, like, okay, maybe finally they're coming around. And the next thing we knew, you couldn't even find the record in a store for 6 weeks. They fucking killed it.
Oh, so like as in promotion, so there was no promotion for it. It's just...
None,
wow.
Zero, not even no promotion. There was no distribution.
Wow.
They did that on purpose because they were embarrassed that somebody else had made that hit.
Wow. And
they wanted to prove that it was a fluke.
I mean, it's still being played to this day on FM stations,
That's how now do you understand why I left?
Absolutely.
When they made that move, that was like moving the goalpost a million miles. That was the last straw.
Right.
That was it. I wasn't going to try again.
and I want to go back real quick before the Juggernaut. I think this was the first time that that Tim actually went on drums. I know you wrote in your book or whatever that Jimmy had left due to other things. Out of respect, I don't really want to know what those other things particularly were. I'm just kind of curious for you. Was Tim the only drummer that you guys kind of auditioned after Jimmy had kind of left?
Yeah, he was the first. He was the first guy after Jimmy.
Okay.
He came by way of a friend. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. Jimmy's leaving. I can't stand it. I hated the idea that Jimmy was leaving. He was my best friend. Right. And things, he got involved with some people that talked him into it, basically. Mm-hmm. And it couldn't work. I mean, I tried everything to beg him not to go. But, we went into two different worlds. He had his friends and I had mine. And they weren't the same friends. And so he decided, and that was it, and he's gone. And all of a sudden, the guy that, he was not just my drummer, he was my best friend. He's the perfect guy for a rock band. You can't get a better guy on drums. Now I needed a drummer, and I spoke to a friend of mine. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And what am I going to do? He goes, well, I know a guy. His name's Tim, and blah, blah, blah. He came up to Montreal. I met with him. I loved the way he played, and boom, he was the drummer right away. It wasn't like we tried different guys.
Okay.
He was the first guy.
And I also liked the fact that you had written in the book as well that Tim is one of those drummers where he plays exactly what you kind of want him to play, as opposed to.
Well, his influences as a drummer were my influences as a drummer. Whereas with Jimmy's influences were different, and they were me to some degree, because I'm the guy telling Jimmy all the time, hey, play it more like this, make it a bit more busy, like I'm the one. But whereas with Tim, he would just automatically do that. So it was nice to not, to have a guy who would automatically do what I might have done, or what I might have wanted for the tune. So that was a sort of a big change for me. But, although, I liked him and everything, he still wasn't Jimmy to me. Jimmy was still my, as a matter of fact, Jimmy's a second cousin, not just my friend. So, I really, really missed Jimmy. And we went through a bunch of other drummers after Timmy. We had Joey Navolo, who's an amazing player, just a fantastic player. He did a lot of stuff for Mike Varney on those records. And we had a couple of other guys, but then finally Dave, who by the way, held Timmy as an idol, right? I ended up with Dave, and here I had a guy that bashed like Jimmy, but had the finesse like Timmy. So I thought, oh, Dave's great, and I've been with Dave since then, since 1991.
Right. I mean, what's funny, he's actually from my specific area, which is great. It's kind of. Yeah. Now, going back to the whole Juggernaut era, did you actually tour a lot for the Juggernaut album?
Well, not as much as we would have liked, because the war was on. We were fighting with these people. It was ridiculous. The more they'd argue with me, the less we would. You have to understand, other people in the industry judge you by who your friends are in the industry. So if you're in good standing with your record label, now all the agents want to be your agent. So once you're not, you're warring with your record company. Now the agents are like, well, yeah, maybe I'll get back to you later, because they're all afraid they're going to lose their gigs with the other bands.
Okay.
That are on that label. And so that's what happens. There becomes this kind of you're either with us or against us mentality. So Frank going out on his own all of a sudden and walking away from the machine has to, by definition, lose great parts of that machine. And many times, some of those people will tell you, I'd really like to work with you, but, I got to think about what it might do if I do that.
Okay. Now, obviously after you left, it had been a couple years, and you had released Full Circle in mid '80s, around '86. I love that you wrote a song called "Breaking Away." I'm pretty sure I know what it. I'm pretty sure I know what it's about.
Yeah, by now.
But it's like I said, there's always a correlation between all your records, and you always have a hard-hitting opening track and then a hard-hitting closing track most of the time, or at least something epic that closes it. And well, this was no exception. I love this record. This is your first that you did pretty much on your own after leaving, but you still had to call it Frank Marino, or did you? Or did you just choose just to call it Frank Marino?
Yes.
Okay.
I had to because they had succeeded in muddying those waters. For 2 albums, they had succeeded. Strange Dreams didn't come out as Mahogany Rush when it did, when it got that hit. And so now these people had succeeded in actually muddying the waters between Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush. So I didn't know what to do. So it was called Frank Marino for 2 reasons. Number one, people were beginning to refer to us that way, and they succeeded in that muddying of the waters. And basically, it wasn't really any of the same people anymore. Even, the bass player was different now, drummer was different. So I said, if ever I'm going to make that move, it's going to be now. But whenever I would go out and gig, I'd get to these places and still see Mahogany Rush on the marquee. And then I'd see Frank Marino on the marquee. And then I'd see Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush on the marquee. So I ended up having 2 parallel careers here. Consequently, you've got a later album comes out as Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush. It comes out again like that. We were trying to figure out, well, what do we do here? Because to me, it should just be my Mahogany Rush music. But by now, I'm not really expressing the old LSD thing anyway. So why don't I just be me? And it's confusing, super confusing. But the music is the same. You'll notice that whether it's called Mahogany Rush or Frank Marino or Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush, the music isn't different. It's like, oh, it's the same band with another name. It's the same music. And now today with a DVD, we have to make that decision again. Like, do you do Frank Marino Mahogany Rush again, or do you do Frank Marino at this point? So you know what? By now, why don't I just be me? At this point, I might as well be me, because I'm not looking to start a career. I'm looking to conclude one.
Another good line. Now, Double Live had come out a couple years after. This was your first. This is what Live should have been, but I'm glad that you had released Double Live, and and added more of the songs from those the 80s periods and whatnot. I think this is probably my favorite version of Poppy is on Double Live. Love the album cover. It's but you had called it Frank Marino Mahogany Rush Live. Was this a conscious decision to do that?
That was again. What do we do? Do we go back to that? What do we do? Because some of the songs are from the earlier stuff. So what do we do? It really, in a sense, a conscious decision. It's almost like a compromise decision. What do we do? While figuring it out. And then, after that, the other one comes out, what's it called? From the Hip. What do we do? That's Frank Marino. It's confusing. I agree. But if anything else, I've established that the 2 things are one and the same after all of this confusion.
Right. This is a particular kind of, at least the original vinyl is kind of hard to find. If you can find a good copy of it, definitely go check it out. I just, like I said, I wish Live was kind of Double Live in terms of the production standpoint. Right. I just love the production on Live, and Double Live had a good production as well. Now let's move to arguably my favorite of the, I guess you would call it, post huge, big time label records. From the Hip is probably my second favorite of your, third favorite of your entire career. I just love, and I know it's weird for me to say that, but it's just, Babylon Rising, just opening up that fucking the album, and the last 2 tracks, not the 16-minute instrumental. I'm talking the original Stand and The Wall Came Down.
Right.
just love those tracks. I love that you added keys into it and kind of slowed it down for the. Like I said, it's either you end with a banger or you end with something that's truly epic, and this is no exception. I do wish though that Stan would be played live more. Love that track for some reason. Now, what was your initial influences on this record? Because again, it's the start of a new decade in your career.
Well, I'm not looking at it that way when I'm doing it. To me, it's the same decade, the same day. You know, I'm doing another record, and I'm just recording what is coming naturally at the time. Again, I'm writing them as I go. It's exactly the same system. I haven't changed anything except some of the musicians are different. So now instead of having Jim and Paul wait for me to tell them what the song is, I have another couple of guys waiting for me to tell them what the song is. It's the same system. It's what do I feel like playing? What do I feel like saying? And then from a producer's point of view, how do you put it together so it's a little bit interesting? Does the last track make you want to put the record on again, which it should? Mind you, I made one, let's say I broke the rules in one case from a production point of view in that I have a few albums that open with a sound effects track and that doesn't tell you what the album's going to be like. And I tend to do that with these psychedelic, like Maxum did it, and that album did it. You know, it starts with weird sounds, you know. Eye of the Storm did it. That's a little breaking of the rules. But normally you want a last track to make you want to put the record on again. So some songs make you want to hear the record again, and some songs are middle of the record sounds, you know? That's how I put it together. But that's as far as the planning goes.
Okay. Now, how do you get distribution when it comes to getting off of a major label, especially in 1990? I mean, how does that happen?
I happen to know Jim West. He was my roadie in the earliest days of Maxum. He became a record company owner for many years. Just in Time is the name of his label. And quite honestly, he's the only honest man I know in music. So when I needed distribution for something, or if I needed distribution, I'd speak to Jim, and Jim, I did this record, you know, you think you'd be interested in putting it out? And it's shake the hand, yeah, no problem. And he's an honest man. He's a super honest man. I don't have to have a contract with Jim. You know, and nobody actually does. He's like a really honest person. Prince of a fellow. That's very rare in our industry. So Jim became the guy that would put my records out if I wished.
Cool.
Now he's not going to distribute it like Columbia because he doesn't have that machine. But going to get out there.
But something is better than nothing, right? That's how it is.
Yeah, but sometimes you say that and it sounds denigrating to what you're choosing. But you're not. You're actually choosing the better portion. If you have a band and you get someone like Jim West to put your record out for you on his label, even though you might result in less distribution and even less promotion, it's actually the better deal. It's not like you're settling for less. You're settling for more.
No. And I wasn't trying to say that. I'm just saying that, like, having distribution in general is huge, you know.
Yeah. Well, today it doesn't matter as much, does it?
Well, I'm finding it actually does, but you know, it's not like it would be in you know, in the 90s or whatever, when you didn't have the internet. Now, you know, this long gap that you had when it came to, you know, 1990 to Eye of the Storm, which came out in 2000. What were you kind of doing? Well,
I did Eye of the Storm in 93, and and then I had kids.
Okay.
And I liked it so much better than the industry, I quit the industry. And once the kids had become 5 years old and whatever, you know, like, it was like I was a totally different guy for those years between the recording of Eye of the Storm and, you know, what finally comes. But Eye of the Storm, that's a very interesting record. To me, it's a super interesting record because when I did Eye of the Storm, I said to myself this, what could I have done in 1971 instead of Maxum if I had what I know now, if I knew then what I know now. And I began to record Eye of the Storm, and I was very, very on purpose to make sure that I wasn't going to use anything that wasn't available to bands in 1971. I didn't even use my wireless, which I'd been using since 76. I used a cord, I used one mic, I used one Marshall, I used one guitar, I didn't use any digital stuff. I used everything on Eye of the Storm. Every single piece of gear we used could have been acquired in 71. They were available. So the only difference between Eye of the Storm and Maxim is the knowledge. Meaning if I'd had the Frank's knowledge in 71, with the equipment available to us then, I could have made Eye of the Storm. And when you play the two of them back to back, you realize that if Eye of the Storm had come out sounding like Eye of the Storm in 1971, it probably would have been bigger than Dark Side of the Moon, based on all of the other records that were around in 1971. Mm-hmm. In its time, Eye of the Storm is another reasonably decent record. But superimpose that song, that sound, and that playing, and those songs, and try to imagine them coming out in 71 instead of Maxim, and it would have been massive. Okay. Massive. So it was an almost experimental. What could we have done with knowledge? How important was knowledge? And the result is Eye of the Storm. So to me, it's a very organic record. It's one of my favorites that I've ever done.
And then shortly after, you had recorded what would become Real Live,
right?
In 2001,
right?
Almost immediately after Eye of the Storm. And I'm just, I don't believe Dave actually played drums on it. If I'm not mistaken.
A guy named Josh Traeger played drums on
that. And I'm just kind of, curious, what was the delay in between 2001 and 2004 on why it kind of didn't come out until then?
It needed some repair.
Okay.
And some mixing and repair. That doing the repair on those tracks was what led me to have the knowledge later on in life to do the massive repair on the DVD that was necessary.
Okay.
So that's what took the extra couple of years. But remember, when we recorded, the night we recorded Real Life, we had just finished a tour where we record everything. I have 80 hard drives of live records. 80 hard drives.
Wow.
Because I would take my recorder.
Wow.
I have a proprietary recording system, and I take it in a rack wherever I go and record every sound check and every show. I have all that. When we got to Montreal and played, which was the last show of that tour, we recorded it like every other night. We weren't making a record. We were recording it like every record, like every show. And then 3 days after that show, 9/11 happened. 3 days later. And as soon as 9/11 happened, the world changed. There was not going to be any more touring. It was all different, right? It was like, oh my God, everyone went nuts. The new world started. So since all the touring and everything was all of a sudden on hold, I said, well, what am I going to do with myself? I might as well look at these hard drives I've been recording forever. When I went to the pile, the first one I took was the last one I recorded. It was the Montreal show. So I stick it on, and I said, wow, what if I just mix this? I got nothing better to do. So I started mixing it, and okay, this, that. And when I got to the end of it, because it was a 4-hour show, there was a whole part of the song that was not there and missing. So I had to repair all that, but I wasn't doing it to put it out. I was doing it just to, to see, like I could have picked any other hard drive, which I still have. And so that's what took the time between, and then finally when the world started stabilizing again, went back to see Jim, and it was like, okay, well, I got this thing, maybe you'd like to put that out. And that's Real Life.
Love it. And obviously the vinyl had just come out for Record Store Day.
Yeah, he surprised me with
this
that.
this year.
He surprised me. He called
At
me
least,
up. He said, "Frank, I want to do vinyl." I said, "What?" I said, "The thing's a double CD." He goes, "No, let me do a volume 1, and now we're going to do a volume 2." He says, "Can you just get the tapes and just sort of do a fade at the end of one side, make it, get everything in there?" So I had to go back into the recording, and I had to make it kind of a vinylized version of it, and then I gave it back to Jim, and I don't even know what he did with it. I know that he put it out, and glad to know you know about it, but I'm not heavily involved in it type of thing. It's Jimmy doing that, but hey, more power to him. I hope it does well.
Well, it's like I said, part 1 could just come out literally 3 or 4 weeks ago. I woke up really early to go get it because I knew my record shop only had one available. So I went and stood in line at 8 o'clock in the morning. Amazing.
Good.
It sounds amazing.
Good.
Yeah. I want part 2, and that's where my question is going.
Coming. I just gave him volume 2 like 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
So
he's
putting it out.
So, do you know? Well, I
think
know you're not heavily involved. So,
if I know Jimmy, I could ask him. But I mean, if I know Jimmy, it's going to be like April.
Oh, so super quick. That's awesome. Maybe another Record Store Day for next year. Or
that's
something.
what he would want is Record Store Day, because that's what he mentioned.
Gotcha.
That Record Store Day. I don't even know what Record Store Day is, but he mentioned that to me, and I went, "Okay, Record Store Day. Never even heard of it."
Well, Record Store Day is because I'm sure you're aware vinyl records are becoming, increasingly popular.
Yeah.
I myself am a physical media guy, so I have nothing but records and CDs. And what Record Store Day is it's a particular day where they release, certain vinyls or whatever for that specific day only.
Okay, what happens
so they're exclusive
after that
to
day?
records. They will go up in price astronomically. And
really?
So you want to kind of get them. Yeah, and they only make a certain amount of records for that specific day. So it's like, this record only gets 1,000, so only 1,000 stores will get to have it. So you want to kind of get it before other people, that want to make a quick buck off of it or something, try and sell it on, eBay or something like that. So, as a music fan, I don't particularly, care for that kind of stuff. I like listening to music. So that's why I buy records. But yeah, so Real Live was a Record Store Day release, and I'm super happy to get it because obviously I couldn't go see you live, last month due to this whole thing. I had actually gotten a ticket to go see you at.
Well, they moved everything to next September.
Yes, exactly. But I bought tickets for the Coach House, so when that particular time comes, I'm super happy to get to see you live finally.
I love the Coach House.
Now,
it's a beautiful room.
Yeah, it's a great venue. I'm really looking forward to seeing you there for the first time. Now let's go to 2004 to like 2010. I'm just kind of curious what took you. Why wasn't there another particular studio record?
No feeling to do one.
Okay.
Just no feeling to do one. It's It's like I only want to do music when I want to do music. If I thought for a moment that doing music was going to be the means by which I'm going to survive and make my living, then I might be doing them every year. But it's not. It's my art. And there's other ways I can make my living. And so why I don't do a record all the time is, well, I don't feel like doing a record. Why don't you watch a movie all the time? Like you feel like watching a movie. So you have to have, in my opinion, if you're going to make a recording, there needs to be a reason you're doing it. I mean, a recording for sale. I make lots of recordings. I can give you 1,000 recordings I do at home just for fun. I got them here. I record all the time. I've got 80 pop tunes that I like pop. I've got them all done. I got a whole blues album I was supposed to finish like years ago. It's half done. So I'm always doing that, but I'm not always doing that in the idea that I'm going to mix them and put them out as records. It's like I'm a painter who's always making paintings, and my attic's full of them. Like there's a lot of stuff.
Right.
But
I mean, I wouldn't expect anything less.
So
now,
will they come out? Probably one day, maybe. Certainly, once I'm expired from the world, some guy's going to come along and say, hey, why don't we do something with these things? You know, they seem to do that all the time. But that's not the plan. So you ask me, why don't I do it more often? Well, it's because at the moment, you know, there might come a time where I'll do 5 in a row because I'll feel like it. You know?
And hopefully that day happens.
Well, you know,
I mean,
God willing, you know, the way I look at life is God willing. Whatever God wills, you do.
Absolutely. Well, now let's go with kind of what you got going on now, Adays. Even though even though it was 10 years ago, which was live at the Agora Theater or whatever. Obviously it's been well documented that there's been numerous problems with the drums in per se.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You had spent arguably 8 to 9 years when
I could have finished
correcting
it.
these.
I could have finished it in 2, but I would have been cheating if I finished it in 2. I wanted it to be what Dave played. I wasn't interested in getting to become and replay the drums or, put in some kind of fake stuff. I wanted to resurrect the damage and clean the damage, note by note and beat by beat, so that when you have the result, it's really what he did. It's not fake.
Right.
And that's what took so long. Now, many people came along and said, what are you doing? Are you out of your mind? You just have to do this. You only have to do that. Who's going to notice? Blah, blah, blah. All the stuff they tell you because they want you to get it out there. And I'm like, no, I want it to be what it was. Otherwise, why am I putting it out? Listen, if the reason I'm putting it out is just so that I can sell it and make money, fine, I take their advice. Do it the best way, the fastest way, whatever, the easiest way. And hope nobody notices. But that's not it. I'm never going to do another DVD, ever. That's it. This is the only one I'll ever do. If someone wants to see me on a video, there will never be another way to do it except live at the Agora. I'm telling you that right now, and I commit to that. So if they really want to see me on a video, that's the only way to do it, and for as long as they're lasting. If we sell more of them, we'll make more of them. But at some point, we can't keep making them. They cost a lot of money. Okay, so if it works out, people want to buy it, then go to where you can buy it online and buy it. Please do. I really appreciate the support. But there won't ever be another DVD of Frank Marino or Mahogany Rush. Ever. Take that to the bank. At least not one that I'm involved in. Maybe some guy will take a picture from the back of a room. But I'm just saying there won't be something I'm involved in like this, ever. And that's why the work was worth it. The work was worth it, Tanner. Because the result was that what I wanted to accomplish was accomplished. It's the greatest piece of editing ever done in the history of music.
I mean, and you also, it's been well documented that there's literally 12 hours of footage that you kind of had to correct, as I can be so nicely in saying it.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, the DVD came down to 6 hours, okay? And there's another 6 hours of the night before. We had the Friday night, the sound check, all of that stuff with the crowd, where we're playing Beatles tunes and Hendrix tunes and all kinds of other things.
Now, Mike, I mean, I'm going to ask this question. Will there ever be a part 2 of that specific footage, or?
If the DVD does well enough that it can, that people really keep wanting it and it keeps going, then I can take the time to go back and finish the part 2.
Okay.
Because it needs work.
Okay.
Right? But I'm not going to start working on part 2 if part 1 isn't even being accepted.
Gotcha.
Like, I have to live too.
Right. Right. No, I totally get it.
So yes, the answer is really, it's in the public's hands. You can't, you can only go to the public and say, do you want this? Right? So how do I know they want it? They can write me a lot of emails saying they want it. That's not the same as actually supporting the thing that's out there.
Right.
they support the thing that's out there. I make very little money on these DVDs, so whatever. I know they say it's $100. Well, it's 6 hours of music and a book. Okay, believe me, it's worth it. But it's not like I'm making $100. I'm lucky if I'm making 10. You know, so I need to sell a lot of DVDs to be able to have the money to do part 2 if I want to, and to have the time to do it, because I have to do something in the meantime.
Right.
Work. I took my career off for almost 10 years to do this work. I didn't play a single gig. You think I earned any money doing that?
No. And, you know.
So there you go. I don't get royalties.
But you had.
You know, I don't live on royalties. I live in a rental. You know.
But you had also mentioned too, though, was like if there's enough demand, you would tour, and obviously, you know, there was enough demand where you started.
And so
you started to tour, and obviously, what's happening now has prevented that. But it will pick up, you know, hopefully next year, and we can all see you play live. But, you know, I want to thank you again for coming on the show and giving me a couple of hours of your time to discuss your career, and just give us all the links that we can get the DVD and anything that Frank Marino Mahogany Rush is up to.
Well, look, obviously there's mahoganyrush.com. That's the main site. And on the front page, there's links to get to the DVD, obviously. But if you want to go direct to find out about the DVD, you write mahoganyrush.net/DVD. And that will tell you everything, including video, trailers and stuff that you can watch it. And then there's YouTube, which we put up a couple of tunes already. We put up The Answer. We put up Something's Coming Our Way. You know, there's full tunes up there, 2 of them, at least. 3 of them if you take my guitar solo, O Little Town of Bethlehem. So you can get a great idea from the trailers and from those 3 tracks what it is we're really offering. The sites are obviously the main website. The .net/DVD is the other site. But then there's also a Facebook page. I don't use Facebook personally, so no one should expect that if they go to my Facebook page that I'm reading it. I'm not. But there are people handling it for me, and if something comes in that's supposed to be called to my attention, generally they'll say, Frank, this guy wrote this, and maybe you should answer him. And I'm very hands-on with fans. They can email me directly, and they do. You know, and many do. And I usually answer their emails. So it's really not that hard to find. YouTube will find it. The website will find it. And Facebook will find it.
Absolutely.
I hope they find it.
Me too.
What can I tell you? I really do.
Me too.
But then again, they've offered me these tour which was supposed to be earlier last year, and then September of last year it got moved, and now even for next September they're even offering more dates.
Wow.
Like at first it was 4 weeks, then it was 6 weeks. Now it's going to be 8 weeks. You know, so, and part of that is going to California. So, hey, God willing. It all ends up happening.
Absolutely.
Barring unforeseen circumstances. But life can get in the way, my friend. You know, one never knows what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
And, barring unforeseen I was ready to go this September. I wasn't sitting around thinking I better stay home because I'm afraid of the virus. I'm ready to go, but they told me you can't. What can I tell them?
Right.
You know? You can't. You're not allowed into the state. Okay. What do you want from me?
Right. Well, Frank's.
I can only do what they tell me.
Totally. I mean, that's where we're kind of all in that same boat. But, you know, Frank, I really do appreciate a couple hours of your time. This is a total bucket list interview for me to do. Huge fan, as I told you at the beginning of the show. Arguably, there's only been a couple moments in my life where music has truly kind of changed the way I've thought about, you know, music in general, and certainly hearing you for the first time did that for me. So thank you for that inspiration. And, you know, another episode of Poppitt's Corner, guys. I'm out of here. Cheers.